The crystal chandeliers caught every flash of the photographer's camera as security guards closed in on the woman in blood-stained scrubs. Her wrists were already bruised from the grip when the antique telephone, installed in 1962 and silent ever since, erupted with a sound that made champagne glasses shake in $100 manicures. The red light pulsed like a heartbeat. Someone whispered military emergency protocol, and the room fell into the kind of silence that precedes catastrophe. The billionaire who'd just called her worthless trash felt his smile crack as the Pentagon operator's voice cut through the ballroom's diamond-studded air, asking for one person by name. And it wasn't him. Before we dive into this story, I need you to do something for me. Stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about power and justice. And when you get there, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The smell hit Dr. Sarah Chen before she even pushed through the emergency room doors at Bridgewater Regional Medical Center. That particular combination of disinfectant, anxiety, and the copper tang of trauma that had become more familiar than her own apartment. She'd been on her feet for 11 hours straight, her navy blue scrubs carrying the evidence of a night that had included 2 cardiac arrests, a construction accident, and a teenage overdose that still made her hands shake when she thought about it. Bed 3 needs sutures, someone called as she passed, but Sarah was already moving toward the nurses' station where the real chaos lived. Bridgewater wasn't a glamorous hospital. It sat in the industrial heart of Port Sterling, Oregon, serving a community that couldn't afford to be picky about their health care. The walls were the color of old newspapers. The equipment was mostly refurbished, and the staff ran on coffee and the kind of dark humor that kept you sane when the world kept bleeding through your doors. "You look like hell," Marcus Webb said without looking up from his charts. He was the only other person in the ER who'd been there longer than Sarah, a physician assistant with silver in his beard and the steady hands of someone who'd seen everything twice. "Flattery will get you everywhere." Sarah grabbed a tablet and scrolled through the incoming cases. "What's the count?" 32 in the last 6 hours. We're drowning." It was the truth they all lived with. Bridgewater operated on the edge of crisis every single day, held together by a staff that worked double shifts and made miracles happen with duct tape and determination. Sarah had been here for 8 years, ever since she'd left a career that nobody knew about and arrived in Port Sterling with a resume that had more gaps than explanations. She kept her head down, did her job, never talked about before. The ER doors exploded inward with a fresh wave of chaos. Paramedics wheeling in a gurney, someone shouting about a motorcycle versus delivery truck. And Sarah was already moving because that's what you did. You moved, you acted, you saved who you could, and learned to live with the ones you couldn't. "Tension pneumothorax," she said the moment she saw the patient's chest, her voice cutting through the noise with the kind of authority that made people snap to attention. "Get me a needle decompression kit, now." Her hands were already working, finding landmarks, measuring distances with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this in conditions far worse than a crowded ER. The needle went in smooth and true, and the patient's chest wall relaxed with a hiss of escaping air that meant the difference between living and dying. "Jesus, Chen," one of the residents breathed. "That was standard procedure," she interrupted quietly, already moving to the next crisis. "Anyone can do it with practice." But that wasn't quite true, and Marcus gave her a look that said he knew it. Sarah had a way of seeing things others missed, of making calls that saved lives, of moving through emergencies with the kind of calm precision that didn't come from medical school alone. People noticed. They just didn't ask questions because in a hospital like Bridgewater, you were grateful for competence and didn't interrogate its source. The next few hours blurred together in the way they always did. Blood pressure readings and IV lines, worried families and bureaucratic nightmares, the constant dance between too many patients and not enough resources. Sarah was suturing a laceration when the atmosphere in the ER changed, the way air pressure drops before a storm. "Everyone, listen up." The voice came from the entrance, sharp and expensive. "I need your attention." Sarah's hands didn't stop moving, didn't even pause, but she felt every muscle in her back tense as Victor Ashford strode into the ER like he owned it, which, as of 3 weeks ago, he technically did. The billionaire had swept into Port Sterling with promises of modernization and efficiency, buying up Bridgewater Regional along with two other hospitals in the county. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary and smiled like a man who'd never been told no in his entire life. As you know, I've been conducting a comprehensive review of operations, Ashford announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected silence. And I'm here to share some exciting changes that will transform Bridgewater into a lean, profitable enterprise. Profitable. Sarah finished the last suture and met Marcus's eyes across the room. They both knew what that word meant in a hospital that served the uninsured, the underinsured, and everyone else the system had failed. We'll be implementing immediate staff reductions, Ashford continued, consulting a tablet held by one of his assistants. Starting with eliminating redundancies in nursing and support services, we'll be cutting the ER staff by 40%. The words landed like grenades. 40%. Sarah watched the color drain from faces around her, saw the quiet devastation spread through people who'd already been stretched past breaking. These weren't redundancies. These were people who held this place together with their bare hands. Dr. Patterson, you're terminated effective immediately, Ashford read from his list without even looking up. Your position has been deemed non-essential. Dr. Patterson was 63 years old and had delivered half the babies in Port Sterling. He stood there in his stained white coat, his face going pale, unable to form words. Angela Morrison, James Torres, Sarah Chen. The world sharpened into hyperclarity, the way it always did in the moment before impact. Sarah heard her name like an echo, felt every eye in the ER turn toward her, but she didn't move, didn't react. She'd learned a long time ago that showing emotion gave people power over you. You're all being let go, Ashford finished. HR will provide your final paperwork. Security will escort you out. Marcus stepped forward, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. You can't just fire people in the middle of a shift. We have patients. I can do whatever I want, Ashford interrupted smoothly. I own this hospital, and what I want is efficiency. These people are dead weight, costing more than they contribute. The market will provide better solutions. Dead weight. The words hung in the air like poison. Sarah looked at Angela Morrison, a nurse who'd worked here for 22 years, who knew every patient's name and never forgot a birthday. James Torres had put 3 kids through college on his salary and volunteered at the free clinic every weekend. They weren't dead weight. They were the heart of this place. You should be thanking me, Ashford added, his smile never wavering. I'm making tough decisions that will save this hospital. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest, familiar and unwelcome. She'd spent 8 years building a life where she didn't have to make decisions, didn't have to lead, didn't have to be anything other than competent and forgettable. But standing in that ER, watching people she respected being treated like line items on a balance sheet, she felt the old instinct stirring. Mr. Ashford. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. With respect, cutting 40% of the ER staff during flu season with a trauma center catchment area of 200,000 people is going to result in preventable deaths. He turned to look at her for the first time, really look at her, and Sarah saw the moment he decided she didn't matter. And you are? Sarah Chen, ER nurse. Well, Nurse Chen, I appreciate your concern, but I didn't ask for your opinion. His smile turned patronizing. I'm sure you're very good at taking blood pressure and changing bedpans, but business decisions are above your pay grade. This is about numbers, not feelings. The dismissal was complete, absolute. Around them, security guards were already moving into position, ready to escort the terminated staff out like criminals. Sarah saw the humiliation on their faces, the shock, the desperate calculation of how they'd pay next month's rent, or their kids' tuition, or the mortgage on a house they'd lived in for 30 years. I understand numbers, Sarah said, her voice still quiet, but something in her tone making people turn. I understand that our average door-to-doctor time is 12 minutes, which is better than any hospital in the state. I understand that our patient satisfaction scores are in the 95th percentile, despite being chronically underfunded. I understand that the people you're calling dead weight are the reason this hospital has the lowest mortality rate in the region. Ashford's smile disappeared. Are you arguing with me? I'm providing data. You said this was about numbers. The ER had gone silent, everyone frozen in that horrible moment when you watch someone else step into the line of fire, and you're grateful it's not you, but ashamed of your relief. Marcus was shaking his head slightly, a warning Sarah pretended not to see. Security, Ashford said quietly, his voice colder now. Escort these people out, all of them, including the argumentative one. The guards moved in, hands on elbows, steering people toward the exit with the kind of professional efficiency that didn't allow for resistance. Sarah let them take her arm, felt the pressure of fingers on her bruised skin where she'd bumped into a gurney earlier, and forced herself to stay calm. Getting angry wouldn't help. Making a scene wouldn't change anything. Just let me do my job, she said as they walked her toward the door, but nobody was listening anymore. Dr. Patterson was crying silently, his shoulders shaking. Angela was on her phone, probably calling her husband, her voice breaking as she tried to explain. James just looked stunned, like he couldn't quite process what was happening. And Sarah was remembering another time, another place, when she'd been marched out under guard and told she was finished. She'd believed it then. She'd let them break her. Not again. But what could she do? She was a nurse with a manufactured past and secrets she'd buried so deep she sometimes forgot they were there. Victor Ashford was a billionaire with lawyers and influence and the kind of power that crushed people like insects. This wasn't a fight she could win. The ER doors closed behind them with a pneumatic hiss, cutting them off from the organized chaos they'd called home. The early morning air was cold, carrying the smell of salt from the harbor and exhaust from the highway. Sarah stood there with the others, their small group looking lost in the vast parking lot, and felt the weight of failure pressing down on her shoulders. "What do we do?" Angela whispered. Nobody had an answer. They stood there in their scrubs, still wearing their ID badges that no longer worked, and watched as Victor Ashford stepped out of the hospital entrance, flanked by his assistants and looking pleased with himself. "This is going to be the first of many changes," he announced to them, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Bridgewater Regional will become a flagship example of efficient healthcare delivery. And all of you, you're relics of an outdated system that prioritized feelings over profit. The market doesn't need you anymore." He turned and walked back inside, leaving them standing there in the cold dawn light, with their pink slips and their dignity in tatters. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, a hairline fracture in the wall she'd built around the person she used to be. She'd spent 8 years being small, being quiet, being someone who didn't make waves or draw attention, or give anyone a reason to look too closely. And where had it gotten her? Standing in a parking lot, fired for daring to speak truth to power, watching good people suffer because one man valued money over lives. "I'm going to the union," Marcus said, his voice rough with anger. "This isn't legal. You can't just—" "He can," Sarah interrupted quietly. "Oregon is an at-will employment state. He can fire anyone for any reason as long as it's not discriminatory, and being unprofitable isn't a protected class." "So that's it? We just accept this?" Sarah looked at the hospital, at the windows of the ER where she could see people moving, treating patients, drowning under the new workload. She thought about the motorcycle accident victim she'd saved, about the teenage overdose, about the hundreds of people she'd helped over the years who never knew her real name or anything about her except that she'd been there when they needed someone. "No," she said softly. "We don't accept it, but we're smart about it." She didn't know what that meant yet, didn't have a plan. But something had shifted, some fundamental calculation in her head that said enough was enough. She'd been running for 8 years, hiding from a past she'd tried to erase, and maybe it was time to stop running. The next 3 days passed in a fog of unemployment paperwork and forced optimism. Sarah sent out resumes to every hospital within 100 miles, knowing that the moment they called Bridgewater for a reference, Victor Ashford would make sure she never worked in healthcare again. She watched the news coverage of the hospital shakeup, listened to Ashford give interviews about innovation and efficiency, saw him smile for the cameras while people she cared about were applying for food stamps. On the 4th day, she got a call from Marcus. "Turn on Channel 7, he said without preamble. "Now." Sarah grabbed her remote, flipping to the local news station, and felt her blood turn to ice. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, "Senator collapses at Bridgewater Regional." Senator Richard Hammond was rushed to Bridgewater Regional Medical Center this morning after collapsing during a campaign stop in Port Sterling, the anchor was saying. Hospital officials say he's in stable condition, but details remain scarce. The senator's office has issued a statement asking for privacy during this difficult time. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. They won't let anyone near him. Ashford's running the show. This is bad. JJ. She knew who that was. Jennifer Park, one of the residents who hadn't been fired yet, smuggling information out to the people who'd been kicked out. Sarah stared at the television, watching footage of Ashford giving a statement outside the hospital, looking solemn and concerned and utterly full of himself. Something was wrong. She could feel it, that instinct that had kept her alive in places where mistakes meant body bags. A senator didn't just collapse. And Victor Ashford was a hospital administrator, not a doctor. He had no business running the show for a medical emergency. Her phone rang. Marcus again. "I'm going down there," he said. "Something's not right." "Marcus, we're not staff anymore. They'll have us arrested for trespassing. I don't care. That man needs a doctor, not a CEO playing God." The line went dead. Sarah sat in her apartment staring at the television, feeling the weight of every choice she'd made over the past 8 years pressing down on her. She could stay here, stay safe, stay hidden. Or she could walk back into that hospital and probably destroy the last remaining pieces of her carefully constructed life. The decision took less than a second. She grabbed her keys and drove to Bridgewater Regional like she was being pulled by a rope. The parking lot was chaos. News vans, security barriers, protesters holding signs about health care for all. Sarah slipped through the crowd, heading for the staff entrance where she still had muscle memory for the code, even if her badge didn't work anymore. The door clicked open. Either they hadn't changed the codes yet, or someone inside was helping. Sarah moved through the familiar hallways, avoiding the main corridors, using the maintenance routes she'd learned during 8 years of shortcuts and emergency responses. She could hear raised voices coming from the ER, tension crackling through the air like static electricity. "Absolutely unacceptable that you're questioning my authority," Ashford was saying, his voice sharp with anger. "I own this hospital, and I will make the medical decisions." "You're not a doctor." That was Jennifer Park, her voice shaking but determined. "You can't just override the medical team." "I can do whatever I want." Sarah reached the entrance to the ER and stopped, staying just out of sight, assessing the situation with the tactical awareness that had been drilled into her in another life. The senator was on a gurney in the center of the room, surrounded by staff who looked terrified and overwhelmed. Victor Ashford stood over him like a conquering general, blocking access, barking orders that made no medical sense. "We're transferring him to Portland General," Ashford announced. "Get the helicopter." "His vitals are unstable," Jennifer protested. "We need to stabilize him first. Did I ask for your opinion? The senator will receive treatment at a real hospital, not this backwater facility. Make the call." Sarah's eyes went to the patient, reading the signs that everyone else was too intimidated to act on. The senator's breathing was labored, his oxygen saturation dropping, a subtle swelling in his neck that screamed danger to anyone who knew how to look. This wasn't a heart attack. This wasn't a stroke. This was something else, something immediate. Something that meant they had minutes, not hours. "His airway's closing," she said, stepping into the room before she could think better of it. Every head turned. Ashford's face went purple with rage. "What the hell are you doing here, security? Get this woman out of my hospital." But Sarah was already moving, her body remembering patterns ingrained so deep they'd outlasted every attempt to forget. She reached the gurney, her hands going to the senator's neck, feeling the cricothyroid membrane with the precision of someone who'd done this in the back of a bouncing Humvee under mortar fire. "You're just a nurse," Ashford snarled, trying to physically push her away. "You don't get to make these calls." "Touch me again, and he dies," Sarah said. And something in her voice, something cold and absolute and carrying the weight of authority that couldn't be faked, made him step back. Her hands were already working, moving with the kind of certainty that came from muscle memory and training that went far beyond nursing school. She'd done emergency cricothyrotomies in field hospitals while taking incoming fire. She'd saved soldiers who should have been dead 3 times over. And she sure as hell wasn't going to let a senator die because a billionaire's ego got in the way of medicine. Scalpel, she said quietly, and Jennifer's hand was there, placing the instrument with the kind of trust that said she understood what was happening even if she didn't know how. The procedure took 47 seconds. Clean incision, precise placement, tube secured, oxygen flowing. The senator's vitals stabilized, his oxygen saturation climbing back into safe range, color returning to his face. Around her, the ER staff stood frozen, staring at her like they'd never seen her before. Because they hadn't. They'd seen Sarah Chen, quiet ER nurse, who kept her head down and never made waves. They hadn't seen Captain Sarah Reynolds, combat trauma surgeon who'd spent 6 years in the most dangerous places on Earth keeping soldiers alive against impossible odds. "What did you just do?" Ashford's voice was barely above a whisper, shock and fury fighting for dominance. Sarah stepped back from the gurney, her hands steady despite the adrenaline crash already starting to hit. "I saved his life." "You're welcome." You assaulted a patient. You performed a surgical procedure without authorization. I'm calling the police. I'm having you arrested. You're going to thank her," Jennifer interrupted, her voice carrying a new kind of steel. "Because if she hadn't acted, you'd be explaining to the entire country why a United States senator died in your hospital while you played doctor." The truth of it hung in the air, undeniable and damning. Security guards had appeared, but nobody was quite sure what to do. Arrest the woman who'd just saved a senator's life, or stand back and let the situation play out. The moment stretched, taut as a wire, everyone waiting to see which way it would break. Then Victor Ashford smiled and Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Get her out of here," he said quietly, the rage transmuted into something colder and more dangerous. "And someone get me the state medical board on the phone. This woman just performed an unauthorized surgical procedure. Her nursing license is done. Her career is over. I'll make sure she never works in healthcare again." The security guards moved in, and this time Sarah didn't resist. She let them take her arms, let them walk her out of the ER, because fighting would only make it worse. She'd done what she came to do. The senator was alive. What happened to her after didn't matter. Except it did. As they marched her through the hospital, past staff who watched with a mixture of awe and horror, Sarah felt the walls closing in. She'd broken cover. She'd acted like the person she used to be, and now everything she'd built over 8 years was crumbling. They took her to a small security office and left her there to wait. Through the walls, she could hear phones ringing, urgent voices, the machinery of institutional power grinding into motion. Ashford would destroy her. He had the money, the influence, the connections to make her disappear so completely it would be like she'd never existed. She'd been here before. Sitting in a room, waiting to be told her career was over, that everything she'd sacrificed for meant nothing because she'd made people uncomfortable with her competence. The first time, she'd believed them. She'd let them break her spirit, convince her she was the problem, bury her so deep she forgot who she was. But that was 8 years ago, and Sarah was different now. The door opened. A hospital administrator she didn't recognize entered, carrying a folder that probably contained her termination paperwork and legal threats. "Miss Chen, I'm afraid we have to inform you." "Save it," Sarah interrupted tiredly. "I know the script. I'm fired. I'm being reported to the medical board. Victor Ashford is going to sue me into oblivion. Did I miss anything?" The administrator blinked, thrown off balance. "Well, yes, essentially. Mr. Ashford wants you to understand the serious nature of your actions. I understand that I saved a man's life. What happens to me after is irrelevant." "You're very calm for someone whose career just ended." Sarah looked at him and for just a moment let him see past the mask she'd worn for 8 years. "This isn't the first time someone's tried to erase me. I'm still here. That should tell you something." She signed the papers they put in front of her, accepted her official termination, and walked out of Bridgewater Regional Medical Center for what she assumed was the last time. The news crews were still camped out front, but nobody paid attention to one fired nurse leaving through the staff entrance. She was invisible again, just the way she'd wanted to be for so long. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "The senator is stable. You saved him. Whatever happens next, remember that." Sarah sat in her car and let herself shake. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving exhaustion and the beginning of fear. She'd just committed career suicide, probably legal suicide, and for what? To prove a point? To be a hero? She'd stopped being a hero a long time ago, but even as she thought it, she knew it was a lie. You didn't stop being what you were trained to be. You just got better at hiding it. The next day, Sarah didn't leave her apartment. She watched the news coverage, watched Victor Ashford give interviews about the unfortunate incident and his commitment to patient safety, watched him spin the narrative until she became the reckless employee who'd endangered a senator's life through unauthorized procedures. He was good at it. By evening, half the state believed she was a dangerous lunatic who should be in jail. Her phone rang constantly, reporters wanting comments, lawyers offering representation, people from her past she'd hoped would never find her. She ignored all of it, sitting in her darkening apartment and trying to figure out what came next. Then, at 11:47 p.m., her phone rang with a number that made her blood run cold. Washington, D.C. area code. Pentagon exchange. A number she'd hoped she'd never see again. Her hand shook as she answered. Reynolds. Captain. The voice on the other end was familiar, aged but unmistakable. General Nathan Caldwell, who'd commanded her unit, who'd pinned the medals on her chest, who'd stood beside her at the court-martial and then watched her walk away. We need to talk. I'm not captain anymore. I'm not anything anymore. We both know that's not true. I saw the footage. Everyone saw it. That was combat protocol, Sarah. That was training only one medical unit in the entire United States military knows. You didn't just save a senator. You showed the whole world who you really are. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling 8 years of careful construction collapse into dust. What do you want? What I want is to know why the hell you're letting a civilian billionaire destroy you when you're one of the most decorated combat surgeons this country has ever produced. Because I'm not her anymore. I left that person behind. Did you? Because from where I'm sitting, you just proved that you can't hide who you are, and maybe it's time to stop trying. The line went quiet for a moment, just the sound of breathing across 1,000 miles of fiber optic cable. Sarah sat in her dark apartment, holding a phone that connected her to a past she'd tried to erase, and felt the foundations of her new life cracking apart. There's going to be a charity gala, Caldwell said finally. Tomorrow night. Victor Ashford is being honored for his philanthropic contributions to healthcare. Very prestigious, very public. The senator will be there. He recovered thanks to you, by the way, and I suspect Ashford is planning to use the event to cement his version of what happened. And you're telling me this why? Because sometimes the truth needs a stage, and I think it's time people knew who they're dealing with. The call ended, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and a decision that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. She could stay in the shadows, let Ashford win, disappear into another city with another manufactured identity, and spend the rest of her life running. Or she could step into the light and face whatever came next. She thought about Dr. Patterson crying in the parking lot, about Angela trying to explain to her husband why they'd lost their health insurance, about James and his kids and all the others whose lives Ashford had casually destroyed. She thought about the senator, alive because she'd refused to be quiet, because she'd trusted her training over her fear. And she thought about the person she used to be, before the court-martial and the discharge, and the years of telling herself that being small was the same as being safe. Sarah picked up her phone and made a call. It took 3 rings before Marcus answered, his voice thick with sleep. I need your help, she said, and I need you to trust me even though what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane. Sarah, it's midnight. My real name is Captain Sarah Reynolds. I'm a combat surgeon. I spent 6 years in Iraq and Afghanistan with Tier 1 medical teams. I've got a Distinguished Service Cross and 2 Bronze Stars. And I'm about to walk into a ballroom full of people who think I'm nobody and show Victor Ashford exactly what it means to underestimate the wrong person. The silence on the other end stretched for 10 seconds. Then Marcus laughed, the sound carrying equal parts disbelief and dark satisfaction. Okay, he said. I'm listening. Tell me everything, Marcus said, and Sarah heard him moving, getting dressed, already committed before he knew the details. That was Marcus. Steady, loyal, the kind of person who didn't abandon his people even when the smart move was to run. She told him. Not everything. There were classified operations she'd take to her grave, but enough. The medical unit embedded with special forces, the field hospitals under fire, the soldiers she'd saved and the ones she couldn't. The incident that ended it all, when she'd refused an order she knew would get people killed, and the Pentagon had decided one combat surgeon wasn't worth the political headache of admitting their chain of command had been wrong. They gave me a choice, Sarah said, her voice flat with old pain. Resign quietly and keep my benefits or face a court-martial for insubordination. I took the resignation, changed my name, started over. Spent 8 years convinced that being invisible was the same as being safe. And Ashford just blew your cover. I blew my own cover the second I acted like myself instead of the person I was pretending to be. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing. So what's the play? The general said there's a gala tomorrow night. Ashford is being honored. If we're going to make a stand, that's when and where. We don't have invitations. I know someone who does. The person she knew was Jennifer Park, who answered her phone on the first ring despite the late hour and listened to Sarah's request with the kind of silence that meant her brain was already working through possibilities. You want me to sneak you into the Chancellor Ballroom during the biggest charity event of the year, Jennifer said, finally, where security is going to be insane and Ashford will probably have a restraining order against you by then. Yes. Okay, I'm in. Just like that? Sarah, you saved a senator's life and got destroyed for it. Ashford is planning to use that gala to paint himself as a healthcare hero while people like Dr. Patterson are selling their cars to pay rent. So yeah, just like that. Tell me what you need. What Sarah needed was a miracle, but she settled for a plan. Jennifer had tickets. Her father was a major hospital donor, the kind of money that bought tables at charity events, and she could get Sarah and Marcus through the door as her guests. The rest would depend on timing, nerve, and whether General Caldwell came through with whatever he had in mind when he'd made that cryptic phone call. Sarah spent the next day preparing the way she used to prepare for missions. She reviewed layouts of the Chancellor Ballroom, studied the guest list Jennifer provided, mapped exits and security positions. Marcus thought she was being paranoid until he watched her work and realized this was muscle memory from a different life. You really did this, he said, watching her mark up a blueprint with tactical annotations. All of it. All of it and more. Sarah circled a service entrance. The question is whether I can do it in a cocktail dress instead of body armor. I've seen you intubate a senator while a billionaire screamed at you. I think you'll manage. The gala started at 7. Sarah arrived at 6:30, wearing a black dress Jennifer had loaned her, and feeling completely exposed. She'd spent 8 years in scrubs and anonymity, and walking into the Chancellor Ballroom felt like stripping naked in front of 1,000 strangers. The space was stunning. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, tables decorated with flowers that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Port Sterling's elite had turned out in force, drinking champagne and congratulating themselves on their generosity, while the hospitals they supposedly supported were falling apart. Victor Ashford held court at the center of it all, resplendent in a custom tuxedo, shaking hands and accepting praise with the practiced humility of someone who knew this was his coronation. He'd won. Sarah had been fired, her reputation destroyed, her career ended, and here he was, being honored for his visionary leadership in healthcare. I hate him, Jennifer whispered, appearing at Sarah's elbow with 2 champagne flutes. I know that's unprofessional, but God, I really hate him. Get in line. They found Marcus near the bar, uncomfortable in a borrowed suit, but wearing it with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. The 3 of them stood together at the edge of the celebration, outsiders watching the system reward someone who'd hurt people for profit, and Sarah felt her resolve harden into something cold and sharp. He's going to give a speech, Jennifer said, checking her phone. 20 minutes. They're setting up the stage now. Sarah watched the preparations, saw the podium being positioned, the microphones tested, the old ceremonial telephone being placed on a side table as a historical artifact. That phone was a relic from the Cold War installed when the Chancellor Ballroom had briefly served as a civil defense headquarters. It hadn't rung in decades, connected to emergency lines that no longer existed, a piece of theater for events like this. Except General Caldwell had said the truth needed a stage, and Sarah was starting to understand what that meant. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. In position, trust the process. NC. Something's about to happen, Sarah said quietly, and Marcus gave her a sharp look. What kind of something? The kind that's going to make tonight very interesting. The ballroom filled steadily, men in tuxedos and women in designer gowns, the air thick with expensive perfume and self-satisfaction. Sarah recognized faces from the news, politicians, business leaders, the hospital board members who'd rubber-stamped Ashford's takeover. Senator Hammond was there too, looking healthy and vigorous. No sign of how close he'd come to dying, except for a small bandage on his neck that his collar mostly hid. He caught Sarah's eye across the room and nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement she wasn't sure how to interpret. Did he know what she'd done? Or had Ashford convinced him that the unauthorized procedure had been reckless instead of life-saving? At exactly 7 o'clock, the lights dimmed and a spotlight hit the stage. The master of ceremonies, some local news anchor Sarah vaguely recognized, stepped up to the microphone with a smile that probably looked sincere if you didn't know better. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the annual Healthcare Excellence Gala. Tonight, we honor those who have shown extraordinary vision in transforming our medical institutions for the 21st century. The speech went on, full of empty phrases about innovation and leadership, building toward the moment when Victor Ashford would take the stage and accept an award for contributions to healthcare that consisted entirely of firing good people and cutting services to vulnerable populations. Sarah felt her hands clench into fists and forced them to relax. Not yet. Whatever was coming, she needed to be ready. And now, the anchor said, please welcome this year's Healthcare Visionary Award recipient, Mr. Victor Ashford. The applause was thunderous. Ashford climbed the stairs to the stage with the confidence of someone who believed he deserved every bit of praise, who genuinely thought he was a hero for making hospitals profitable. He took the crystal award, held it up for the cameras, and stepped to the microphone. Thank you, he said, his voice carrying perfectly through the sound system. This is truly an honor. When I look at what we've accomplished at Bridgewater Regional and our other facilities, I'm proud to say we've proven that excellence and efficiency can go hand in hand. Sarah's jaw tightened. Marcus put a hand on her arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. We've made tough decisions, Ashford continued. We've had to let go of people who were comfortable with the status quo, who resisted change, who put their personal feelings above the greater good of the institution. That's never easy. But leadership means having the courage to do what's necessary, even when it's unpopular. He was talking about them, about Dr. Patterson and Angela and James and everyone else he'd destroyed, turning their terminations into evidence of his strength, his vision, his willingness to make hard choices. Sarah felt sick. Just yesterday we had an incident that perfectly illustrates this principle, Ashford said, and Sarah's blood turned to ice. A former employee terminated for cause broke into the hospital and performed an unauthorized surgical procedure on a patient. It was reckless. It was dangerous. And it's exactly the kind of cowboy medicine we're working to eliminate. The room murmured, shocked. Senator Hammond's expression darkened, but he didn't interrupt. Now, by sheer luck, the patient survived, Ashford acknowledged. But that doesn't excuse the fundamental breach of protocol, the arrogance of someone who thought they knew better than the system. We've filed complaints with the state medical board and are pursuing legal action. Because in modern healthcare, we don't reward rogue actors. We hold them accountable. He was doing it. Right here, in front of everyone, he was destroying what was left of her reputation while painting himself as the responsible adult protecting patients from dangerous mavericks. Sarah wanted to scream, to rush the stage, to tell everyone the truth about what had really happened. But that would only prove his point, make her look unstable, give him exactly what he wanted. Stay calm, Jennifer whispered. Whatever happens, stay calm. Ashford launched into the next part of his speech, talking about the future of healthcare, about AI and efficiency and all the buzzwords that meant cutting people to boost profit margins. The audience ate it up, nodding along, convinced they were witnessing visionary leadership instead of systematic cruelty. Then Sarah saw them, security guards moving through the crowd, their eyes scanning faces, and she knew they were looking for her. Ashford had probably given orders the moment he saw her name on the guest list. They were going to throw her out, humiliate her one more time, make sure everyone saw the dangerous former employee being removed for their protection. The guards were getting closer. 20 feet. 15. Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her, ready to intervene, but what could he do? They were outnumbered. outpositioned, and making a scene would only make things worse. 10 feet. One of the guards pointed directly at her, said something into his radio. Jennifer grabbed her hand, squeezed hard. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I shouldn't have dragged you into this." "Are you kidding? This is the most interesting thing I've done all year." The guards reached them just as Ashford was finishing his speech, building to some grand conclusion about the future he was creating. The lead guard, a large man with a face like granite, put his hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Ma'am, you need to come with me." "I'm a guest," Sarah said quietly. "I have an invitation." "Mr. Ashford has requested your removal. You're trespassing." Around them, people were starting to notice, heads turning, whispers spreading. Sarah saw Ashford glance their way from the stage, saw him smile with satisfaction. This was going exactly how he'd planned. The troublemaker removed, his authority reinforced, his narrative confirmed. "Please don't make this difficult," the guard said, his grip tightening. Sarah met his eyes and saw a man doing his job, following orders, not thinking about whether those orders were right or wrong. She'd been there too, once upon a time, following orders right up until she couldn't anymore. "Okay," she said. "I'll go." Marcus started to protest, but Sarah shook her head slightly. Fighting would accomplish nothing. She let the guards take her arms, let them start walking her toward the exit, while the gala continued around them. Ashford's voice followed her from the speakers, triumphant and cruel. "We're building a healthcare system that puts efficiency first, that doesn't apologize for making the hard choices, that understands the bottom line isn't just about money, it's about results." They were halfway to the doors when it happened. The old telephone on the side table, the Cold War relic that hadn't rung since 1962, erupted with a sound like an air raid siren. Not a polite trill, but a harsh mechanical scream that cut through conversation and music, and Ashford's speech like a knife through silk. Every head in the ballroom turned. The guards stopped walking, confused. A red light on the phone's base began to pulse, casting eerie shadows across the marble floor. Sarah felt her heart stop. She knew that sound. She'd heard it in classified briefings, in emergency operations centers, in the kind of places where decisions got made that never appeared in the news. That was a priority military channel, the kind activated only for national emergencies or matters of extreme security. Ashford stared at the phone, his speech forgotten, his face going pale. The master of ceremonies looked around helplessly, unsure what to do. The entire ballroom had gone silent, 1,000 people frozen in crystalline confusion. The phone kept ringing. "Someone should answer that," Senator Hammond said from his table, his voice carrying in the silence. There was something in his tone, something knowing, and Sarah realized he'd been expecting this. One of Ashford's assistants picked up the receiver with a shaking hand, held it away from her ear like it might bite. "Hello?" Her face went white. She looked at Ashford, then at the senator, then out across the ballroom until her eyes found Sarah. There's someone asking for Captain Sarah Reynolds." The name dropped into the silence like a bomb. Captain. Not nurse, not former employee, but captain. Military rank. Sarah felt every eye in the room turn to her, saw the confusion spread like ripples in still water. The guards holding her arms loosened their grip, uncertain. "That's impossible," Ashford said, his voice tight. "There's no one here by that name. This is some kind of prank." "Sir, the caller identified himself as General Nathan Caldwell, United States Army, and he says it's urgent." Sarah's breath caught. Caldwell had actually done it. He'd activated a Cold War emergency line in the middle of a civilian charity event to make a point that couldn't be ignored. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was completely unauthorized and probably violated about 17 regulations. It was exactly what she needed. "Put it on speaker," Senator Hammond said, standing. His voice carried authority now, the kind that came from 2 decades in Washington and chairmanship of the Senate Armed Services Committee. "I want everyone to hear this." The assistant looked at Ashford, who seemed to be having trouble forming words. His carefully constructed evening was unraveling, his moment of triumph becoming something else entirely, and he didn't know how to stop it. "Do it," Hammond ordered, and the assistant obeyed, placing the handset in a cradle that projected the voice across the ballroom's sound system. "This is General Nathan Caldwell, commander of the 75th Medical Brigade, United States Army." The voice was clear and authoritative, carrying the weight of 4 decades of service. "I'm calling to speak with Captain Sarah Reynolds regarding a matter of national importance." The ballroom remained frozen. Sarah felt the security guard's hands fall away completely, felt them step back, and she stood alone in a circle of empty space while everyone stared. "I'm here," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. "Captain Reynolds, I apologize for the dramatic intrusion, but given the circumstances and the misinformation being spread about your actions, I felt the American people deserved to hear the truth." Ashford found his voice. "Now, wait just a minute. I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing, but this is a private event and you have no authority to—" "I have every authority, Mr. Ashford," Caldwell interrupted, his tone turning to ice. "When matters of military personnel and national security are concerned, I have considerable authority indeed. And I suggest you be quiet and listen, because what I'm about to say concerns you directly." The rebuke was public and absolute. Ashford's face turned purple, but he stayed silent, perhaps finally realizing he was in waters far deeper than he understood. "Captain Reynolds," Caldwell continued, "served with distinction in the United States Army Medical Corps for 6 years. She was embedded with Tier 1 Special Operations units, operating in the most dangerous combat zones in Iraq and Afghanistan. She performed over 300 emergency surgeries under fire, maintaining a survival rate that exceeded any combat surgeon in modern military history." Sarah closed her eyes, hearing her life laid out for strangers, feeling the persona she'd built crumbling like sand. She received the Distinguished Service Cross for actions during the Battle of Kandahar Province, where she kept 17 wounded soldiers alive for 8 hours while the base was under sustained attack. She has 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and commendations from 3 different theater commanders. The silence in the ballroom was absolute now. Sarah could feel the shift happening, the recalibration of how people saw her. Not the fired nurse, not the rogue actor, something else entirely. "Captain Reynolds left the service under circumstances that I'm not at liberty to discuss publicly," Caldwell said, and Sarah heard the careful phrasing, the protection of classified operations even now. But her service record speaks for itself, and the suggestion that she is anything other than one of the finest medical professionals this nation has ever produced is not just wrong. It's an insult to everyone who's ever worn the uniform. "This is ridiculous," Ashford said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Even if this is true, it doesn't excuse breaking protocol, performing unauthorized procedures." "The procedure in question," Caldwell interrupted, "was an emergency cricothyrotomy performed on Senator Richard Hammond when his airway was closing due to angioedema. Captain Reynolds recognized the signs immediately and acted with the speed and precision that saved the senator's life. The medical team at Bridgewater Regional has confirmed that without her intervention, Senator Hammond would have died within minutes." Hammond stood, unbuttoning his collar to show the bandage on his neck. "He's right. The doctors told me I was minutes from complete airway closure. Sarah, Captain Reynolds, she didn't ask permission because there wasn't time. She just acted, and I'm alive because of it." The room erupted in murmurs. Sarah saw faces changing, people reassessing, the narrative Ashford had built starting to crack. But it wasn't enough. Caldwell had established her credentials, but that didn't solve the larger problem of Bridgewater Regional, of the staff who'd been fired, of the systematic destruction of healthcare in favor of profit. "There's more," Caldwell said, and something in his tone made the room go quiet again. "Mr. Ashford, I understand you've filed complaints with the State Medical Board regarding Captain Reynolds." "That's correct. Her actions were reckless, and you're going to withdraw those complaints." The statement hung in the air like a threat. Ashford stared at the phone, his face a mixture of outrage and confusion. "I will do no such thing. Who do you think you are calling here and making demands? I don't care if you're a general or the president himself. You don't have any authority over my business decisions." "You're right," Caldwell agreed. "I don't have authority over your business, but I do have authority over military personnel and their records. And I'm formally notifying you that Captain Reynolds' service record includes classified operations and clearances that remain active under Department of Defense protocols. Any legal action against her will require a full disclosure hearing where those operations would need to be discussed." Sarah understood immediately what Caldwell was doing. He was bluffing, Her clearances had been revoked when she resigned, but Ashford didn't know that. And the threat of government involvement, of classified information, of military lawyers in federal jurisdiction was enough to make any civilian think twice. Furthermore, Caldwell continued, I've been made aware of certain financial irregularities at Bridgewater Regional and your other holdings. Irregularities that suggest Medicare fraud, insurance billing schemes, and violations of the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. The Department of Defense takes a dim view of such activities, particularly when they affect facilities that treat our veterans. Ashford's face went from purple to white. You can't prove any of that. Actually, we can. We've been investigating for 3 months. One of your former employees brought certain documents to our attention, documents showing systematic overbilling and patient dumping. We were waiting for the right moment to act. I think tonight qualifies. Sarah looked at Marcus, who was staring at the phone with wide eyes, and suddenly understood. He'd been the one. He'd found something in the records and gone to the military, probably through veteran advocacy groups, and they'd been building a case while Sarah had been wallowing in unemployment. This is insane, Ashford said, but his voice shook. You can't just call a civilian event and make accusations without evidence, I have all the evidence I need, Mr. Ashford, and I'm giving you a choice. Withdraw your complaints against Captain Reynolds, reinstate the staff you wrongfully terminated, and cooperate fully with the federal investigation, or face charges that will put you in prison for the next 20 years. The ballroom had descended into chaos now, people talking over each other, phones coming out to record, reporters who'd been covering the gala suddenly realizing they had a much bigger story. Sarah stood in the center of it all, watching Victor Ashford's empire crumble in real time, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 8 years. Hope. You have 24 hours to decide, Caldwell said. I suggest you choose wisely. Captain Reynolds, I'll be in contact soon. Stay strong. The line went dead, leaving only dial tone and the sound of 1,000 conversations erupting at once. Ashford stood on the stage, gripping the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright, his award forgotten, his speech in ruins. Security guards who'd been ready to throw Sarah out now kept their distance, unsure whose orders to follow. Senator Hammond walked through the crowd towards Sarah, and people parted for him like the Red Sea. He stopped in front of her, this man she'd saved, this politician who could have stayed silent and let Ashford's version stand. Captain Reynolds, he said formally, I owe you my life, and I owe you an apology for not speaking up sooner. You didn't know. I suspected. When they told me what happened, when they showed me the procedure you'd performed. I served in the Navy. Did you know that? I recognized combat medicine when I saw it. But I let Ashford convince me to stay quiet, to let him handle it. That was wrong. Sarah didn't know what to say. She'd spent so long being invisible that having someone acknowledge her publicly felt surreal. I'm going to make this right, Hammond continued. I chair the Armed Services Committee, but I also have influence on healthcare policy. What Ashford did to you, to this hospital, to all those people, it's not going to stand. Senator, no, let me finish. You saved my life without hesitation, knowing it would cost you everything. That's the kind of courage we should be celebrating, not punishing. And I'm going to make damn sure everyone knows it. He turned to face the crowd, raising his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've all learned something important tonight. Real healthcare isn't about profit margins or efficiency metrics. It's about people like Captain Reynolds, who put lives before politics, who act when action is needed, who remind us what it means to serve others. The applause started small but built, spreading through the ballroom until it was thunderous. Sarah felt tears threatening and forced them back. She wasn't ready for vindication, wasn't sure she deserved it, but it was happening whether she was ready or not. Ashford fled the stage, surrounded by his assistants and lawyers, his face a mask of fury and fear. Sarah watched him go and felt no satisfaction, only a tired certainty that this wasn't over. Men like Ashford didn't accept defeat gracefully. They fought back, found angles, destroyed anyone who threatened them. But for the first time in 8 years, Sarah wasn't alone. Marcus appeared at her elbow, grinning like a madman. Holy hell, Sarah, I don't even have words. You brought the evidence to the military. I found things, yeah, billing records that didn't make sense, patient transfers that looked suspicious. I didn't know if it would amount to anything, but I couldn't just let him win. Jennifer joined them, her eyes shining. This is incredible. You're incredible. Do you know what this means? Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed. It means we fight back. Not just you. All of us. Everyone he hurt, everyone he fired, everyone who's been watching hospitals turn into businesses instead of places that heal people. You just showed us it's possible. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Reporters trying to get statements. Hospital board members suddenly very interested in talking to her. Lawyers appearing from nowhere with offers of representation. Sarah fielded what she could and deflected the rest, exhausted by the attention and the sudden shift from pariah to hero. At midnight, she finally escaped to the balcony for air. The city spread out below, Port Sterling's lights reflecting off the harbor, and Sarah let herself breathe for what felt like the first time in days. Captain Reynolds. She turned to find a woman in an expensive suit standing in the doorway, one of the board members from Bridgewater Regional, Sarah thought, though she couldn't remember the name. I wanted to apologize, the woman said. We trusted Ashford. We believed him when he said the changes were necessary. We should have looked closer. You should have. Yes, and we're going to fix it. Emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. Ashford's out pending the investigation. And we want to offer you a position. Sarah stared at her. Doing what? Director of Emergency Medicine. Full authority to rebuild the department, rehire the staff, restore the programs Ashford cut. It won't be easy. He did real damage. But if you're willing, I'll think about it, Sarah interrupted because she genuinely didn't know. Taking the position meant staying visible, staying exposed, accepting that she couldn't hide anymore. It meant becoming Captain Reynolds again instead of Sarah Chen. It meant all the baggage and trauma and glory that came with that identity. The woman nodded and left, and Sarah stood alone on the balcony trying to process everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she'd been a fired nurse with no prospects. Now she had job offers, public vindication, and a past she couldn't escape even if she wanted to. Her phone buzzed. A text from General Caldwell. Well done, Captain. I always knew you'd find your way back. The world needs people like you in it. Don't hide from that. Sarah looked out at the city, at all the lives intersecting below, and thought about Dr. Patterson and Angela and James, about the patients who needed advocates, about the system that chewed people up and spit them out unless someone was willing to fight back. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to be who she'd always been. Her phone rang, an unknown number, and Sarah's instincts suddenly screamed danger. She answered cautiously. Captain Reynolds. The voice was smooth, cultured, and carried undertones of barely controlled rage. This is Victor Ashford. We need to talk. Sarah's fingers tightened on the phone, her combat instincts reading the threat in Ashford's voice like a sniper reading wind patterns. I don't think we have anything to discuss. Oh, I think we do. You've just destroyed my reputation in front of half the state's political establishment. Did you really think I'd simply accept that? You destroyed your own reputation. I just stood there while the truth came out. The truth. Ashford's laugh was ugly, sharp with desperation masked as contempt. You mean the lies your general friend told? The convenient accusations that appeared at exactly the right moment? You orchestrated this, Captain. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. Sarah moved away from the balcony railing, hyper-aware of her surroundings, scanning for threats she wasn't sure existed but couldn't ignore. Years of operating in hostile territory had taught her that cornered men were the most dangerous, and Ashford was definitely cornered. If you have something to say, say it. Meet me, tomorrow. 10 a.m. at the Harborside Tower, my office. Come alone, or I release everything I've found about your past, and I mean everything. The court-martial transcripts, the classified operations you think are buried, the real reason you left the military. I have sources, Captain, and they're very motivated to help me. The line went dead before Sarah could respond. She stood holding the phone, feeling ice spread through her chest. He was bluffing. He had to be bluffing. The court-martial records were sealed, the operations classified beyond civilian access. But Ashford had money, connections, and the kind of vindictive determination that could move mountains if it meant destroying an enemy. She should ignore him, walk away. Let the federal investigation handle it. But if he really did have access to those files, if he could prove she'd been forced out of the military, it would undermine everything Caldwell had said, turn her from hero back to disgraced soldier. Make her look like a liar instead of a victim of institutional politics. Sarah went back inside, found Marcus and Jennifer still navigating the chaos of reporters and well-wishers, and pulled them aside into a quiet corner. "We have a problem," she said, and explained Ashford's call. Marcus's expression darkened. "It's a trap. He's trying to isolate you, get you alone where he can threaten you without witnesses." "I know, but if he really has those files, then we deal with it through legal channels. Sarah, you can't go meet this guy alone. He's desperate, and desperate men do stupid, dangerous things. I've handled worse. In combat zones with a team backing you up. This is different." Sarah knew he was right, but she also knew that letting Ashford control the narrative, even for a day, could undo everything they'd accomplished tonight. The federal investigation would take weeks, maybe months. In that time, Ashford could leak information, spread lies, poison the well so thoroughly that the truth wouldn't matter anymore. "I'm going," she said quietly, "but I'm not going unprepared." Jennifer grabbed her arm. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to record everything, wire myself up, and make sure that whatever he says, we have evidence. If he's planning to threaten or blackmail me, I want proof." "That's still incredibly dangerous." "Everything worth doing is." The next morning arrived too quickly, bringing gray skies and the smell of rain off the harbor. Sarah dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, a simple blouse, nothing that screamed military or medical, and fitted herself with a recording device borrowed from a journalist friend of Marcus's who'd covered war zones and understood operational security. The recorder was smaller than a USB drive, hidden in a button on her shirt, with enough battery life for 3 hours of continuous recording. She arrived at Harborside Tower at 9:50, using the extra time to scout the building, identify exits, map routes of egress the way she'd done in Kandahar and Fallujah. The tower was all glass and steel, 40 stories of corporate power overlooking Port Sterling's waterfront. Ashford's office occupied the entire top floor, accessible only by a private elevator that required a key card. The lobby guard called up to announce her, looking uncomfortable when Sarah gave her name. Whatever instructions Ashford had left, they clearly involved treating her with caution. "Mr. Ashford says to send you up," the guard said finally. 40th floor. The elevator ride felt like descending into enemy territory, that same tightness in her chest she'd felt riding in Humvees through hostile towns. Sarah controlled her breathing, centered herself, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The elevator opened directly into a reception area decorated with expensive art and the kind of minimalist furniture that cost more than it looked. Ashford's assistant, a different one from last night, this one older and wearing an expression of profound discomfort, gestured toward a set of double doors. "He's waiting for you." Sarah walked through into an office that was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city, a desk the size of a small car, leather furniture arranged around a coffee table that probably cost more than a year of nursing salary, and Victor Ashford standing with his back to the door, staring out at the harbor like a king surveying his domain. "Captain Reynolds," he said without turning, "thank you for coming." "Let's skip the pleasantries. You threatened me. I'm here. What do you want?" He turned, and Sarah was struck by how much he'd aged overnight. The confidence from the gala was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. The look of a man who'd lost everything and decided to burn the world down on his way out. "What I want is for you to understand the position you're in," Ashford said calmly. "You think you've won. You think your general friend and his threats have destroyed me. But you're wrong. The federal investigation will take months, years maybe. And in that time, I have resources you can't imagine. Legal teams, media connections, political favors owed. I can bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again." Sarah remained still, letting him talk, letting the recorder catch every word. "But I'm willing to make a deal," Ashford continued. "You make a public statement saying you acted rashly at the hospital, that your military training kicked in inappropriately for a civilian setting, that you regret the incident and support my leadership at Bridgewater Regional. You do that, and I let the court-martial records stay buried." "You don't have those records." "Don't I?" Ashford picked up a folder from his desk and tossed it toward her. It landed on the coffee table with a soft thud. Sarah didn't move, didn't look at it, but she could see the classification markings from where she stood. Her stomach dropped. "How did you get that?" Money talks, Captain. Even in the Pentagon. I have friends in defense contracting, people who owe me favors, people with access to files that are supposed to be sealed. And what I found is fascinating. He opened the folder himself, pulling out pages that Sarah recognized with sick certainty. Her service record, commendation reports, and the transcript from the hearing that had ended her career. Captain Reynolds refused a direct order to prioritize treatment of CIA contractor over critically wounded enlisted personnel, Ashford read aloud. When pressed, she stated that her medical oath superseded chain of command, and that she would not let soldiers die to save a civilian of questionable value to the mission. That's what got you kicked out, isn't it? Not some vague classified circumstances. You defied orders, and they couldn't have a combat surgeon who thought she knew better than her commanders. Every word was accurate. Sarah had refused to let 3 soldiers die while she saved a CIA contractor who'd been hit during a black op gone wrong. She'd made a choice based on medical need, not political value, and the fallout had destroyed her career. But hearing it now, twisted in Ashford's voice to make her sound insubordinate instead of ethical, she realized how easily the truth could be weaponized. You proved their point last night, Ashford continued, warming to his theme. Once again, you ignored authority, performed an unauthorized procedure, and justified it by claiming you knew better. It's a pattern, Captain, and patterns are what end careers. I saved Senator Hammond's life. You got lucky, but luck isn't the same as being right. And when I release these files, when everyone sees that you were forced out of the military for the exact same behavior you exhibited at Bridgewater, they're going to start asking questions. Was the senator really in danger? Or did you manufacture a crisis to play hero? Did you actually save him? Or did you create a situation that required saving? Sarah felt her control slipping, rage building behind the calm facade she'd maintained. That's insane. The medical records can be interpreted multiple ways. I have doctors on retainer who will testify that the senator's condition was manageable, that emergency cricothyrotomy was excessive, that a properly trained physician would have used less invasive measures. It becomes your word against theirs, and your word comes with a history of defying authority. He had thought this through, every angle covered, every weakness identified and exploited. This was what happened when someone with unlimited resources decided to destroy a person. They found leverage and applied it until something broke. So here's my offer, Ashford said, moving closer. You recant, publicly. You tell the world that you acted inappropriately, that you support my vision for Bridgewater Regional, that the general's accusations were based on misunderstandings and incomplete information. You do that, and these files stay private. You get to keep your hero status, your job offers, your dignity. Everyone wins. Except the people you fired. Except the patients who will suffer under your vision. Except everyone who depends on hospitals being about healing instead of profit. That's not your concern anymore. You're a nurse, not a policymaker. Stay in your lane, Captain, or I'll run you over. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd built his entire identity on power and control, who couldn't conceive of losing because he'd never truly lost before. The federal investigation probably terrified him, but he was doing what powerful men always did when threatened, attacking, trying to regain control through intimidation and manipulation. No, Sarah said quietly. Ashford blinked, thrown off balance. What? No, I'm not recanting. I'm not supporting you. I'm not helping you destroy what's left of decent health care in this city because you threatened me with my own service record. Then I release everything, today, and I make sure every news outlet in the state knows that the hero who saved Senator Hammond is actually a disgraced soldier who was kicked out for insubordination. Do it! The words hung between them like a challenge. Ashford stared at her, searching for weakness, for fear, for any sign that his threats were working. Sarah met his gaze with the same calm she'd maintained under mortar fire and watched him realize she wasn't bluffing. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice tight with fury. I've made plenty of mistakes. This isn't one of them. Sarah turned and walked toward the door, half expecting him to try to physically stop her, but Ashford remained frozen in place, his carefully constructed plan crumbling because he'd miscalculated the one variable he couldn't control, her willingness to accept consequences rather than compromise. She was halfway to the elevator when his voice called after her. "You'll regret this." "Probably, but I'll regret it on my own terms." The elevator doors closed on Ashford's expression of impotent rage, and Sarah allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding her system the way it always did after combat, but she'd done it. She'd faced down a billionaire's threats and refused to bend. Now came the hard part, dealing with the fallout. She called Marcus from the lobby. "He has my court-martial records. He's threatening to release them unless I publicly support him." "Jesus, what did you tell him?" "I told him no." The silence on the other end stretched for 3 seconds. Then Marcus laughed, sharp and surprised. "Of course you did. Okay, we need to get ahead of this. If he's going to release the records anyway, we control the narrative first." "How?" "You go public. Full press conference. Tell your story before he can twist it. Own the truth instead of letting him weaponize it." Sarah's stomach churned at the thought. Standing in front of cameras, exposing the most painful parts of her past, letting the world see her failures alongside her successes. But Marcus was right. Ashford's power came from secrets and shame. Take those away, and he had nothing. "Set it up," she said. "Today, before he has time to act." 2 hours later, Sarah stood in a conference room at the Port Sterling Press Club, facing a wall of cameras and reporters who'd been promised a major revelation about the Bridgewater Regional scandal. Marcus and Jennifer flanked her, silent support against the tide of scrutiny. Senator Hammond had offered to attend, but Sarah declined. This needed to be her truth, not someone else's endorsement. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "My name is Captain Sarah Reynolds, and I'm here to tell you what really happened, all of it." She laid it out methodically, the way she'd been trained to give mission briefings. Her service record, the combat operations, the commendations and the saves, and the soldiers who'd lived because she'd been there. Then the incident in Kandahar, the CIA contractor, the wounded enlisted men, the order she'd refused. "I was told to let 3 soldiers die so I could prioritize treating a civilian contractor whose political value outweighed their lives," Sarah said, and heard the anger creeping into her voice despite her efforts to stay calm. "I refused. I told my commanding officer that my medical oath didn't have a line about checking someone's rank or political connections before treating them. I saved all 4 patients that day, and 3 days later, I was informed that my services were no longer required." The room was silent except for the clicking of camera shutters and the scratch of pens on notebooks. They gave me a choice: resign quietly or face a court-martial for insubordination. I took the resignation because I was tired of fighting. I thought if I walked away, changed my name, started over, I could leave all of it behind. I spent 8 years trying to be invisible, trying to be someone who didn't make waves or challenge authority or remind anyone that I used to be the person who stood up to generals. She paused, gathering strength for the next part. "Then Victor Ashford fired me for being dead weight. He called me worthless. He had security drag me out of a hospital I'd given 8 years to, all because I spoke up when he was about to get people killed with his cost-cutting. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought about staying quiet, about accepting it, about being invisible one more time." Sarah looked directly at the cameras, at the lenses that would carry her words to thousands of people, and felt something shift inside her chest. But then Senator Hammond collapsed, and I watched Ashford try to make medical decisions he wasn't qualified to make because his ego mattered more than a human life. And I realized I was right back where I started, watching someone with power decide that politics mattered more than the people we're supposed to serve. So I acted. I saved the senator's life, and I'd do it again without hesitation. She pulled out her phone, connected it to the room's sound system, and played the recording from Ashford's office. His threats filled the room: the blackmail, the manipulation, the casual admission that he had sources who'd illegally accessed classified files. When it finished, the silence was deafening. "Victor Ashford thinks he can destroy me by exposing my past," Sarah said, "but I'm exposing it myself. Yes, I was forced out of the military for refusing to let soldiers die for political convenience. Yes, I changed my name and hid for 8 years. Yes, I performed an unauthorized procedure on Senator Hammond because he would have died otherwise, and I'm not willing to let people die just because some authority figure thinks profit matters more than lives." She felt tears threatening but pushed them back. Not yet. Not until this was done. I'm not a perfect person. I'm not even a particularly good person. I'm just someone who believes that when you have the skills to save a life, you use them. Authority, protocol, profit margins, none of that matters when someone's dying in front of you. And if that makes me unsuitable for working in modern healthcare, then modern healthcare needs to take a hard look at its priorities. The questions came fast after that, reporters shouting over each other, but Marcus stepped forward and held up a hand. Captain Reynolds won't be taking questions today. But I will say this. The federal investigation into Bridgewater Regional is ongoing, and we have full confidence that it will reveal the extent of Mr. Ashford's fraudulent activities. In the meantime, we're asking that the State Medical Board expedite their review of the senator's case and that Bridgewater Regional's Board of Directors take immediate action to protect patients from further harm. They left through a side exit, avoiding the crush of reporters, and Sarah felt the weight of exposure pressing down on her like a physical thing. She'd done it. She'd stripped herself bare in front of the world, handed them every weapon Ashford could have used against her, and trusted that the truth would be enough. Now they waited to see if she was right. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with debates about military ethics, healthcare profit models, and whether Sarah was a hero or a reckless maverick. News channels ran endless loops of her press conference, dissecting every word. Medical professionals weighed in, split between supporting her actions and condemning her breach of protocol. But through it all, a counter-narrative was building. People sharing stories of being mistreated by healthcare systems that valued money over care, veterans talking about the impossible choices in combat zones, families who'd lost loved ones because hospitals prioritized efficiency over lives. Sarah became a symbol for something larger than herself, whether she wanted to be or not. Ashford fought back through his lawyers, issuing statements about rogue employees and unauthorized procedures and the need for accountability in medicine. But the recording had done its damage. Nobody trusted a man who'd been caught on tape threatening blackmail and admitting to illegally accessing classified files. 3 days after the press conference, Sarah's phone rang with a familiar Washington, D.C. exchange. "Captain," General Caldwell said, "I've been watching the news." "Sir, I'm sorry if I..." "Don't apologize. You did what needed to be done. But I'm calling because there's been a development. The Department of Justice has taken over the investigation into Ashford and Bridgewater Regional. They're moving fast, faster than I expected." Sarah's heart rate kicked up. "What does that mean?" "It means they found something big, something that goes beyond Medicare fraud. I can't share details yet, but I wanted you to know this is about to get very serious, very quickly." "How serious?" "Federal charges serious, possible RICO implications serious. Ashford isn't just going to lose his hospitals, Captain. He's going to prison." The line went quiet for a moment as Sarah processed the implications. She'd wanted justice, wanted him held accountable, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "There's something else," Caldwell continued. "The Army is reviewing your case, the discharge, the circumstances around Kandahar. We have new command now, people who weren't involved in the original decisions. They're looking at whether you were treated fairly." Sarah's breath caught. "Sir, I'm not asking for..." "I know you're not asking, but justice works both ways, Captain. What was done to you was wrong, and there are people who want to make it right. I can't promise anything, but I wanted you to know the wheels are turning." After he hung up, Sarah sat in her apartment and tried to process the idea that her past might be redeemable, that the choice she'd made, saving soldiers over politics, might finally be recognized as the right call instead of career-ending insubordination. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Turn on Channel 7 now." Sarah grabbed the remote and felt the world tilt sideways. Breaking news banner. Live footage of federal agents entering Harborside Tower. Victor Ashford being led out in handcuffs, his face ashen, his expensive suit crumpled. The anchor's voice was almost breathless with excitement. "Arrested this afternoon on multiple charges, including healthcare fraud, insurance fraud, witness intimidation, and illegal access to classified government documents. Sources say the Department of Justice has been building this case for months, and that additional charges may be forthcoming." Sarah watched the man who'd tried to destroy her being put into a federal vehicle, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Vindication. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just the quiet certainty that sometimes, very rarely, the system actually worked the way it was supposed to. Her phone rang. Marcus. Are you watching this? Yeah. Sarah, they're saying he's looking at 20 years minimum. The fraud went back decades. He was running schemes at every hospital he owned, billing for procedures that never happened, transferring expensive patients to public facilities to avoid costs. It's massive. Good. The board wants to meet with you tomorrow. They're offering you the director of emergency medicine position officially, plus oversight on rehiring the terminated staff and restructuring the entire department. Sarah closed her eyes. This was what she'd fought for, what she'd risked everything to achieve. The chance to rebuild Bridgewater Regional into something that actually served patients instead of shareholders. The chance to bring back Dr. Patterson and Angela and James and everyone else who'd been casualties of Ashford's greed. Tell them yes, she said. I'll take it. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about soldiers she'd saved and ones she'd lost, about the choice in Kandahar that had cost her everything, about 8 years of hiding and the strange relief of finally being seen. Around 2 a.m., she gave up and drove to Bridgewater Regional, parking in the lot where she'd been fired just days before. The ER was chaos as always, ambulances arriving, people in pain, the endless cycle of human suffering that demanded response. Sarah watched through the windows, seeing Jennifer coordinating with residents, seeing the skeleton crew struggling under impossible workload, and felt the pull of purpose she'd been denying for too long. She was about to leave when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against every instinct, she answered. Captain Reynolds. The voice was professional, female, carrying authority. This is Agent Rebecca Martinez, FBI. I'm the lead investigator on the Ashford case. I need you to come to our field office immediately. Sarah's stomach dropped. Why? Because we just found something in Ashford's files that changes everything, and you're in danger. A man in the gallery stood abruptly, his hand reaching inside his jacket with the kind of practiced motion that screamed threat assessment to anyone with combat training. SSG Chen was already moving, closing the distance with the speed of a ranger who'd spent years responding to contact. Capitol Police converged from 3 directions simultaneously, their movements coordinated and precise. Sarah dropped below the witness table on pure instinct, her body remembering protocol from hostile territory, even as her mind registered that she was in the United States Capitol, supposedly one of the most secure buildings in the nation. The room erupted into controlled chaos, security shouting commands, senators being rushed toward exits by their protective details, journalists trying to capture footage while being herded back by agents. The man in the gallery raised both hands immediately, his face showing confusion rather than aggression. I was just reaching for my phone. I wanted to record. Capitol Police had him on the ground in under 3 seconds, hands zip-tied behind his back, multiple weapons trained on his prone form. SSG Chen reached Sarah's position and positioned himself between her and the gallery, his body language radiating the kind of alertness that came from expecting secondary attacks. Stay down until we clear the room, Chen said quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd been under actual fire and knew the difference between real threats and false alarms. Senator Hammond's voice cut through the commotion, amplified by the microphone system. Everyone remain calm. Security is handling the situation. The hearing will resume once the room is secured. It took 12 minutes to verify that the man in the gallery was exactly what he claimed, an over-enthusiastic spectator who'd made the catastrophically stupid decision to reach into his jacket pocket in a room full of armed federal agents operating under heightened threat conditions. He was arrested anyway, charged with disrupting a congressional proceeding, and removed while protesting his innocence. Sarah remained below the table until SSG Chen gave the all-clear, then stood slowly, her hands shaking with adrenaline crash. Every eye in the room was on her, some sympathetic, some calculating whether she was worth the drama, some clearly annoyed that the hearing had been interrupted by what turned out to be nothing. Captain Reynolds, Senator Hammond said once order was restored, I apologize for that disruption. Are you able to continue? Sarah looked at the senators arrayed before her, at the cameras still recording, at SSG Chen positioned to intercept any future threats. She thought about running, about the 8 years she'd spent hiding from exactly this kind of visibility, and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of what safety actually meant. Yes, Senator, I can continue. The next 2 hours of testimony were methodical and devastating. Sarah laid out the evidence against not just Ashford, but the entire network of private equity firms that had employed him. She explained how the business model worked: acquire struggling hospitals using borrowed money, cut costs dramatically to boost short-term profitability, then sell to the next buyer before the consequences of understaffing and reduced services became publicly visible. Each hospital in the chain suffered the same pattern of declining care, and each community was left with degraded healthcare infrastructure while the investors extracted millions in profit. How many facilities have been affected by this pattern? Senator Hammond asked. The FBI investigation has identified 147 hospitals across 28 states that were acquired, stripped, and either sold or closed by consortium members. That's not counting the facilities that are currently owned and operating under the same model. A senator from Ohio leaned forward, his expression skeptical. Captain Reynolds, you're describing a massive conspiracy involving some of the most respected names in private equity. That's an extraordinary claim. What evidence supports it beyond the actions at one hospital? Sarah pulled up a document on the tablet in front of her and projected it onto the room's screens. This is a presentation from Meridian Capital Partners, dated 18 months ago, outlining their healthcare investment strategy. Note the language here: maximizing operational efficiency through strategic workforce reduction, optimizing reimbursement capture, minimizing uncompensated care exposure. Those are euphemisms for firing experienced staff, aggressive billing practices, and refusing to treat uninsured patients. She advanced to the next slide. And here's the outcome data from hospitals they acquired. Average nurse-to-patient ratios decreased by 42%. Emergency room wait times increased by an average of 90 minutes. Mortality rates for common procedures increased by 13%. Those aren't accidents or unfortunate side effects. They're the predictable result of treating hospitals like commodities instead of critical infrastructure. The questioning continued through lunch and into the afternoon, with senators alternating between supportive inquiry and hostile cross-examination. Sarah handled both with the same calm precision, answering every challenge with documented evidence, deflecting attempts to paint her as a disgruntled employee by pointing to the federal indictments that had been announced the previous day. Around 3 p.m., Senator Hammond called a surprise witness, Dr. Patricia Morrison, the chief medical officer who'd resigned from Meridian Capital Partners 6 months earlier and had apparently been cooperating with federal investigators ever since. Dr. Morrison was in her 60s, gray-haired and carrying herself with the exhausted dignity of someone who'd fought internal battles and lost but refused to stop fighting. She took the oath and faced the committee with eyes that had seen too much. Dr. Morrison, Hammond began, you spent 3 years working for Meridian Capital Partners, advising them on hospital acquisitions. Can you describe what that role entailed? I was brought in to evaluate target hospitals from a medical perspective, Morrison said, her voice steady despite visible tension. My job was to identify which departments could be cut, which staff could be eliminated, which services could be reduced without triggering immediate regulatory intervention. And did you express concerns about patient safety? Constantly. Every acquisition plan I reviewed, I raised red flags about inadequate staffing, dangerous patient load ratios, elimination of critical services. I was told those concerns were overly conservative and that market forces would ensure quality remained acceptable. What does that mean, market forces? It means they believed that if care got bad enough, patients would go elsewhere, and that would motivate improvements. But in many of the communities where they operated, there was no elsewhere. They'd acquired the only hospital within 50 miles. So patients had no choice but to accept degraded care or travel hours for treatment. Senator Hammond pulled up another document. I'm looking at an internal email you sent to Meridian's CEO dated 14 months ago. You wrote, and I quote, "The staffing levels you're proposing for Bridgewater Regional ER will result in preventable deaths. I cannot in good conscience support this acquisition under these terms." What was the response? Morrison's hands tightened on the table. I was told to revise my assessment to focus on efficiency opportunities rather than patient safety concerns. When I refused, I was removed from the Bridgewater evaluation and eventually pushed out of the company entirely. Why are you testifying today? Because I've spent 30 years in healthcare, and I'm ashamed that I participated in this system for as long as I did. Captain Reynolds did what I should have done. She stood up publicly and said no. And people like Victor Ashford destroyed her career for it, the same way they tried to destroy mine. The difference is, she fought back. The testimony created a seismic shift in the hearing's dynamics. Morrison wasn't a fired nurse with an axe to grind. She was a senior medical executive with decades of experience confirming everything Sarah had said. Combined with the federal indictments and the evidence Sarah had presented, the narrative became impossible to dismiss as exaggeration or personal vendetta. By the time the hearing adjourned at 6 p.m., social media was erupting with clips of the testimony. News networks were running special coverage. Congressional phones were ringing with constituent calls demanding action. The consortium's carefully constructed defense that this was all misunderstanding and overzealous prosecution had collapsed under the weight of documented evidence and credible testimony. Sarah was escorted to a secure conference room where Agent Martinez was waiting with news that managed to be both satisfying and disturbing. 3 more executives surrendered to federal authorities this afternoon, Martinez said. They're all negotiating plea deals, offering testimony against higher-ups in exchange for reduced sentences. The entire organization is imploding. That's good news. It is. But, Captain, we're also seeing concerning activity in offshore accounts. Large transfers to jurisdictions with no extradition treaties, executives booking flights out of the country, evidence being destroyed. The people at the very top of this network are preparing to run before we can grab them. Sarah felt frustration building. They'd exposed the system, brought charges, forced public accountability, but the architects might still escape. Can you stop them? We're trying. Treasury is freezing assets. State Department is revoking passports. But these people have resources we're still mapping. They planned for this contingency. Then we need to make running more expensive than staying. How? Sarah thought about the dead man's switch she'd set up, about the journalists holding her documentation, about the leverage she'd used to force the consortium's initial retreat. What if we released everything? Not just the evidence supporting federal charges, but the complete picture. Names, transactions, relationships, every detail about how this network operates. Make them too visible to hide. Martinez looked uncertain. That could compromise ongoing investigations. Defense attorneys would argue we contaminated the jury pool, violated discovery protocols, or it could create so much public pressure that they can't find anywhere to hide. These people operate through anonymity and shell companies. Strip that away, and they're just criminals everyone can see. It's risky. Everything worth doing is. Martinez studied Sarah for a long moment, clearly running calculations about rules versus results, procedural propriety versus practical justice. If we did this, and I'm not saying we are, how quickly could you compile and verify a complete disclosure package? I already have one. It's been sitting with 3 journalists since last week, ready to release if something happened to me. All I have to do is tell them to publish. You've been planning this. I've been preparing for contingencies. There's a difference. Martinez pulled out her phone and made a call that lasted 90 seconds, speaking in the kind of careful language that suggested she was talking to someone who could authorize decisions above her pay grade. When she disconnected, her expression was grim but determined. You have approval to coordinate release with your journalist contacts. But, Captain, this is going to make you even more of a target. The people who were willing to threaten you before will be absolutely desperate once you destroy their ability to operate anonymously. Let them come. I'm tired of defense. The coordinated release happened at 9 p.m. Eastern, simultaneous publication across 3 major news outlets. The Washington Post led with the organizational structure and financial flows. The New York Times focused on patient harm and medical consequences. ProPublica published the complete document cache with interactive tools for exploring the network connections. Within an hour, it was the top story on every news network. Within 2 hours, Congress was scheduling emergency oversight hearings. Within 3 hours, state attorneys general from 14 states were announcing investigations. The consortium that had operated in shadows for decades was suddenly under spotlights from every direction, their business model exposed, their executives named, their profits revealed as blood money extracted from communities desperate for health care. Sarah watched the coverage from the FBI safe house, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction, more like the exhausted relief of a soldier after a battle that cost more than expected but achieved the objective. Her phone rang constantly with requests for interviews, statements, appearances. She ignored most of them, but accepted one call from Dr. Patterson. "Sarah, are you watching this?" "I am." "They're talking about legislation, actual laws to prevent this kind of private equity takeover of hospitals. Senator Hammond is proposing a bill that would require healthcare facilities to prioritize patient care over profit margins. This is real change. If it passes. It'll pass. The public pressure is too intense. Even senators who normally protect corporate interests are backing away from these people. You did this." Sarah wanted to correct him, to point out that it was a collective effort, that the FBI and DOJ and whistleblowers like Dr. Morrison had all contributed. But Patterson wasn't wrong about the fundamental catalyst. She'd refused to stay quiet when staying quiet was easier. Everything else had followed from that choice. "We all did it," Sarah said finally. "I just happened to be the one visible enough to make a target." After disconnecting, Sarah allowed herself to think about what came next. The hearings would continue for weeks, possibly months. The trials would take years. But the immediate crisis was resolved. Ashford was in custody. The consortium was exposed. The hospitals could begin recovering. She could go back to Port Sterling, take up the director position at Bridgewater Regional, rebuild the emergency department into something that actually served patients. She could finally stop running. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Rooftop. Now. Come alone." Sarah's combat instincts screamed trap, but the message included a photo that made her blood run cold. Marcus and Jennifer, bound and gagged in what looked like a warehouse, a masked figure visible in the background. The timestamp showed it was taken 15 minutes ago. She called Martinez immediately. "They have Marcus and Jennifer. I just got a message." "Don't respond. Don't go anywhere. This is exactly the kind of trap. I know it's a trap, but they have my people, which means I don't have a choice. We can send tactical teams, negotiate for their release, and by the time you mobilize, they're dead. You know how these things work. They're not looking for negotiation. They want me. Then we use you as bait. Wire you up, position teams, turn their trap into an ambush. No time. The message said now, and they'll be monitoring for federal response. If they see SWAT teams mobilizing, Marcus and Jennifer die." Sarah disconnected before Martinez could argue further and studied the message details. The photo's metadata had been stripped, but the background showed industrial architecture. Old brick, high ceilings, the kind of converted warehouse that dotted Port Sterling's waterfront. There were dozens of buildings that matched, but Sarah's tactical brain noticed something specific. A faded paint mark on the wall behind Jennifer that looked like a shipping company logo from the 1970s. She'd seen that logo before, during a call to the waterfront when a construction worker had been injured at a redevelopment site. The building had been abandoned for 20 years, structurally unsound, scheduled for demolition. Perfect place for an ambush. Sarah grabbed the keys to the FBI sedan that was supposed to be for emergencies only and drove toward the waterfront, her mind running through tactical options that all ended badly. She was walking into an obvious trap with no backup and minimal equipment. The smart play was to wait for the FBI, coordinate a proper response, minimize risk. But smart plays didn't save hostages when the people holding them were willing to execute immediately. She parked 3 blocks from the target building and approached on foot, using shadows and cover the way she'd been trained in urban combat environments. The warehouse loomed against the night sky, most windows dark, but light visible on what looked like the top floor. Sarah counted exits: main entrance on the ground floor, fire escape on the east side, loading dock doors that were probably chained. Her phone buzzed. New message: top floor, 5 minutes or they die. Sarah took the fire escape, climbing with the practiced silence of someone who'd spent years moving through hostile territory. The metal stairs were rusted and unstable, creaking under her weight despite her best efforts at stealth. If anyone was watching, they knew she was coming. The top floor was accessed through a door that hung open, inviting her inside. Sarah paused at the threshold, every tactical instinct screaming ambush, and made the conscious decision to step through anyway because Marcus and Jennifer didn't deserve to die for her choices. The interior was a gutted industrial space, open floor plan, exposed beams, broken windows offering views of the harbor. Marcus and Jennifer were bound to chairs in the center of the room, gagged but visibly alive and terrified. 3 figures in masks stood behind them, weapons visible but not immediately threatening. "Captain Reynolds," one of the masked figures said, the voice distorted by an electronic modulator. "Thank you for being so predictable." Sarah raised her hands slowly, showing she was unarmed. "You have me. Let them go." "Not quite yet. You see, your little publicity stunt today caused some very important people significant problems. Billions of dollars in frozen assets, criminal investigations in multiple jurisdictions, congressional hearings that will drag on for years. That's unacceptable." "Then they shouldn't have built a criminal enterprise. They built an efficient business model. You turned it into a crime by being self-righteous about things you don't understand. The healthcare system was broken long before we got involved. We just recognized the reality and adapted accordingly." Sarah kept her hands visible, her eyes tracking the 3 figures, calculating distances and response times. "And now you're going to kill me and them to send a message." "Not exactly. We're going to offer you a choice." The masked figure pulled out a phone and turned it towards Sarah, showing a live video feed. The image showed Bridgewater Regional Medical Center's emergency department, crowded with patients receiving treatment. "We have people positioned throughout that hospital, maintenance workers, contractors, even a few staff members who've been very helpful. At my signal, they introduce a contaminant into the ventilation system. Within minutes, everyone in that ER, staff and patients, will be exposed to a chemical agent that's remarkably similar to what Syrian forces used in Damascus." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. "You're threatening to gas a hospital." "We're providing incentive for cooperation. Here's how this works. You record a video statement recanting everything you said in today's hearing. You admit you fabricated evidence, exaggerated patient harm, and coordinated with federal prosecutors to frame innocent businessmen. You destroy your own credibility completely and publicly. That won't stop the investigations. The evidence stands regardless of what I say. But it creates reasonable doubt, makes everything contestable. Our lawyers can work with doubt, and in exchange, the hospital stays safe, your friends live, everyone goes home. And if I refuse? Then we demonstrate what happens to people who interfere with our business. The ER gets contaminated, your friends are executed, and you get to live knowing that your pride killed dozens of innocent people." Sarah looked at Marcus and Jennifer, saw the terror in their eyes mixed with something else. A desperate plea that she not give in, that she not let these people win, even if it cost them their lives. She thought about the patients in Bridgewater's ER, about Dr. Patterson and Angela, and all the people who depended on that facility staying operational. "Show me proof the hospital threat is real," Sarah said quietly. "Show me you actually have people in position and capability to follow through." The masked figure worked the phone, pulling up another video feed. This one showed a man in maintenance coveralls standing in what was clearly Bridgewater's mechanical room, next to the HVAC system, holding a canister marked with chemical hazard symbols. Convinced? Sarah's tactical brain was running scenarios, calculating odds, looking for any angle that didn't end with mass casualties or complete capitulation. The FBI knew where she'd gone. Martinez would be mobilizing teams even now, but federal response took time, required coordination, and these people were positioned to execute immediately, unless she could delay them. "I'll do it," Sarah said. "I'll record your statement, but I need time to make it convincing. If I just read words you wrote, nobody will believe it. I need to craft something that sounds like my actual voice, my reasoning, something credible." "You have 5 minutes. That's not enough. Give me an hour. Let me write something that will actually hold up to scrutiny. Otherwise, you're wasting everyone's time with a video that gets debunked in 20 minutes. The masked figures consulted quietly among themselves. Sarah used the time to study the room more carefully. Exit points, potential weapons, anything she could use if this turned into a fight. She spotted SSG Chen's silhouette in one of the broken windows behind the masked figures, positioned with a rifle and clearly waiting for a clean shot. The FBI had followed after all. They were in position. Sarah just needed to create an opening. 30 minutes, the lead figure said finally. But your friends stay restrained, and if you try anything, the hospital contamination proceeds immediately. Understood. They provided her with a laptop and a script they wanted her to follow. Sarah pretended to read it carefully while actually watching the tactical situation develop in her peripheral vision. More silhouettes appeared in windows. FBI hostage rescue team moving into position, setting up crossfire, establishing containment. She started typing, making it look like she was drafting a statement while actually composing a message. 3 hostiles, one with remote trigger for hospital attack. Need simultaneous takedown or they execute. Position, center of room, 15 feet from hostages. Sarah angled the laptop so SSG Chen might see the screen through his scope if he was paying attention. It was a desperate play, relying on a soldier she hadn't worked with in 8 years, understanding her tactical thinking and being positioned to act on it. "Time's up," the lead figure said. "Let's see what you've written." Sarah turned the laptop to show the screen. "It's not finished. I need another—" The windows exploded inward simultaneously as flashbang grenades detonated with concussive force that rattled Sarah's bones. She dropped immediately, covering her head, as FBI tactical teams swarmed through multiple entry points. Gunfire erupted, controlled bursts from professional operators engaging specific targets. It was over in 8 seconds. 2 masked figures down, the third restrained and disarmed before he could reach the phone trigger. SSG Chen materialized from the chaos, cutting Marcus and Jennifer free while FBI agents secured the room. "Hospital?" Sarah asked urgently, her ears still ringing from the flashbangs. "Secured," Agent Martinez said, appearing from the stairwell with her weapon drawn. "We had teams standing by the moment you left the safe house. The man in the mechanical room was arrested 6 minutes ago." Sarah felt her legs give out, adrenaline crash hitting all at once. She sat on the floor while EMTs checked Marcus and Jennifer for injuries, while FBI agents processed the scene, while SSG Chen positioned himself nearby with the calm vigilance of someone who'd completed his mission but remained alert for contingencies. "You followed me," Sarah said to Martinez. "Of course we did. You think we'd let a key witness walk into an obvious trap without backup? We just had to wait until you were inside and they'd revealed their full plan before moving. Otherwise, they might have executed the hospital attack out of spite. You used me as bait. You used yourself as bait. We just made sure it worked." Marcus stumbled over, his hands still shaking from being bound. "Sarah, you can't keep doing this. My heart can't take it." "Agreed," Jennifer added. "Next time someone kidnaps us, maybe try negotiation before the tactical assault?" Sarah laughed, the sound emerging as something between humor and hysteria. "I'll add it to the protocols." The 3 figures were identified over the next hour through fingerprints and facial recognition. 2 were former military contractors with histories of working for corporations in conflict zones, the kind of operators who'd transitioned from legitimate security work to whatever paid best. The third was a lawyer from Meridian Capital Partners, who'd apparently decided that protecting the consortium's interests justified kidnapping and terrorism. Their phones revealed communications with 5 other consortium executives who were arrested within hours. The plot had been extensive, not just threatening Sarah, but coordinating a multi-state pressure campaign involving threats to other witnesses, attempts to bribe investigators, and plans to destroy evidence before it could be used in trials. By dawn, 17 additional arrests had been made. The consortium that had seemed untouchable 72 hours ago was in complete collapse, its leadership scattered, its business model exposed, its ability to operate destroyed by publicity and law enforcement attention. Sarah watched the sunrise from Bridgewater Regional's emergency department, where she'd gone directly from the FBI debriefing because sitting still felt impossible. "Doctor." Patterson was finishing a night shift, and he found her in the break room staring at coffee she hadn't drunk. "You should be resting," he said gently. "You just survived a hostage situation." "I'll rest when this is finished." "It is finished. They're arrested, the network's exposed, legislation is moving forward. You won, Sarah." She wanted to believe that, but combat experience had taught her that victories were temporary and enemies adapted. For now. But these systems are resilient. Someone else will find a new way to extract profit from sick people, and we'll be fighting the same battles with different names. Probably. But you've given us tools to fight back. You've shown that ordinary people can stand up to billion-dollar interests and win. That matters more than you realize. Sarah looked around the ER. at nurses treating patients with competence and compassion, at residents learning proper medicine instead of cost-cutting protocols, at a facility that was functioning the way healthcare was supposed to function. This was what she'd fought for. Not abstract justice, but this concrete reality of people being helped instead of harvested. Her phone rang. Senator Hammond. Captain Reynolds, I wanted you to know that the Senate passed emergency legislation this morning, unanimous consent, which almost never happens. It requires strict oversight of private equity healthcare acquisitions, mandates patient care metrics over profit metrics, and creates whistleblower protections for healthcare workers who report fraud or unsafe conditions. We're calling it the Reynolds Act. Sarah felt something catch in her throat. Senator, I don't need... This isn't about what you need. It's about making sure what happened to you in Bridgewater doesn't happen to others. You've changed healthcare policy in this country, Captain. That's a legacy that will save lives for decades. After he disconnected, Sarah sat in the quiet of the break room and tried to process the idea that her name would be attached to legislation, that her refusal to stay silent had created systemic change. It felt surreal, like something that happened to other people in different circumstances. Marcus found her 20 minutes later. The board wants to see you, something about officially starting your position as director. I look like hell. You look like someone who just saved a hospital and possibly reformed American healthcare. I think they'll forgive the rumpled clothes. The board meeting was mercifully brief. Formal offer of the director position, confirmation of salary and authority, expressions of gratitude that felt genuine despite the corporate setting. Sarah accepted with the understanding that she'd be starting immediately, that Bridgewater needed leadership, and she was the only person everyone trusted to provide it. Walking out of that conference room, Sarah felt the weight of 8 years of hiding finally lift. She wasn't Captain Reynolds pretending to be Sarah Chen anymore. She wasn't a combat surgeon hiding from her past. She was just Sarah, someone who'd made hard choices, survived their consequences, and emerged on the other side still standing. Her phone buzzed one final time. Unknown number. Sarah almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Captain Reynolds? The voice was familiar. David Reston, the lawyer who'd threatened her a week ago. I wanted to congratulate you. You've successfully destroyed a business model that was generating sustainable returns for our investors. What do you want, Reston? To give you some advice. You've won this battle, but you've also revealed something important about yourself. You can't walk away from fights even when walking away would be smarter. That's going to be a problem because there are always more fights, always more corruption, more people willing to profit from others' suffering, more systems that need reforming. Is there a point to this? The point is that you've made yourself into a symbol, and symbols either inspire change or get destroyed by the forces they threaten. I hope you're prepared for what comes next. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, recognizing the truth in Reston's warning. She'd won, yes, but victory came with visibility. She couldn't disappear again, couldn't hide, couldn't pretend to be ordinary. She'd become the person who stood up to power and won, which meant every future battle would find her whether she wanted it or not. But maybe that was okay. Maybe being visible was better than being safe. Maybe fighting was better than hiding. Sarah walked back into Bridgewater Regional's emergency department, where Dr. Patterson was teaching a resident how to properly interpret an EKG, where Angela was managing a trauma with the competence of someone who'd been doing this for decades, where James was talking a frightened child through a procedure with infinite patience. This was worth fighting for. These people, this place, this vision of healthcare that prioritized healing over profit, worth every risk, every threat, every battle she'd have to fight going forward. Her pager went off. Multiple vehicle accident on Highway 101, ambulances inbound, all hands needed for mass casualty response. Sarah felt her training kick in automatically, her mind shifting into the tactical calm that came from years of handling emergencies. She walked toward the trauma bay, ready to do what she'd always done, save who she could, fight for every life, refuse to accept that profit mattered more than people. Behind her, unnoticed in the crowd of visitors, a man in expensive business attire lowered his phone and walked quietly toward the exit. He'd recorded everything: Sarah's position, her routine, the hospital's security protocols. Information that would be valuable to certain parties who'd been watching this situation develop with great interest. The war wasn't over. It had just entered a new phase, and Sarah Reynolds, whether she knew it or not, had just become the most valuable target in American healthcare. The mass casualty incident consumed the next 6 hours. 12 patients from a chain reaction collision, varying from minor lacerations to critical internal injuries. Sarah moved through the controlled chaos with the kind of focused calm that came from years of operating in far worse conditions, coordinating teams, making triage decisions, keeping people alive through competence and will. By the time the last patient was stabilized and transferred to surgery, Sarah's scrubs were stained and her body was running on fumes. She was washing blood off her hands in the staff bathroom when Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her expression troubled. "There's someone here to see you, says it's urgent. Tell them I'm off duty for the next 12 hours. It's Agent Martinez and Sarah. She looks worried." Sarah found Martinez waiting in the small conference room the ER used for delivering bad news to families. The agent's face confirmed Jennifer's assessment. Something had happened, something that required immediate attention. "The man who was surveilling you earlier," Martinez said without preamble. "We identified him from hospital security footage. His name is Robert Chen, no relation to SSG Chen. He's a private investigator who specializes in corporate espionage and witness intimidation. And Captain, he was hired by a consortium member we haven't arrested yet." Sarah felt exhaustion give way to alert tension. "Who?" "Catherine Aldrich. She's the majority stakeholder in Meridian Capital Partners and at least 6 other private equity firms involved in the healthcare fraud network. We knew she existed but couldn't establish direct involvement. Everything ran through intermediaries, shell companies, layers of legal insulation. She's been invisible. Until now. Until now. Robert Chen's phone records show he's been reporting directly to her for the past week. Surveillance on you, intelligence gathering on the hospital's security, detailed analysis of your routine and vulnerabilities. Captain, she's planning something, and we need to move you back into protective custody immediately." Sarah looked through the conference room's window at the emergency department. Her department now, her responsibility, her purpose. "How long has she been operating?" "At least 20 years that we can confirm. She pioneered the private equity healthcare acquisition model in the early 2000s, made billions, then went completely dark around 2015. No public appearances, no interviews, operates through proxies and lawyers. She's like a ghost who owns half the healthcare infrastructure in America. And she's come out of hiding because I exposed her network. We think she sees you as an existential threat. Every other obstacle she's faced could be handled through money or legal maneuvering. But you're different. You have credibility, public support, military credentials that make you hard to discredit. And you've already proven you won't back down from threats." Sarah sat in one of the chairs families used while waiting to hear whether their loved ones would survive. "What's your tactical assessment?" "Aldrich has resources that dwarf what Ashford commanded. If she's moved from passive observation to active planning, it means she's decided you need to be eliminated. We can protect you, but only if you cooperate with security protocols. And if I refuse? Then you're gambling with your life and the lives of everyone around you. Captain, I know you're tired of running and hiding, but there's a difference between courage and suicide. Please don't confuse the two." Sarah was about to respond when her phone rang. An actual call, not a text, from a number with a New York area code. She showed it to Martinez, who immediately started tracing while Sarah answered. "Captain Reynolds!" The voice was female, cultured, carrying the kind of absolute confidence that came from decades of unchallenged power. "My name is Catherine Aldrich. I think it's time we spoke directly." "I have nothing to say to you." "That's unfortunate because I have quite a bit to say to you. I've been watching your crusade against my business interests with great interest. You're remarkably persistent for someone with no institutional backing, no legal training, and no understanding of the complex economic forces you're disrupting." Sarah met Martinez's eyes, saw the agent gesturing for her to keep Aldrich talking while the trace completed. "I understand that you built an empire by treating hospitals like commodities and patients like revenue streams. That seems pretty straightforward. Simplistic analysis from someone who's never run a business. I provided capital to failing institutions, imposed efficiency standards, and created sustainable models for healthcare delivery in communities that couldn't support traditional approaches. Your emotional reaction to necessary business decisions doesn't change the fundamental economics. My emotional reaction? 13% increase in mortality rates isn't emotional. It's criminal. It's statistical variation within acceptable margins. But I didn't call to debate healthcare policy with someone who has a savior complex. I called to offer you the same choice I've offered every other obstacle I've encountered: disappear quietly and live comfortably, or continue fighting and accept the consequences. Sarah felt her combat instincts sharpen. What consequences? I've acquired Bridgewater Regional Medical Center. The sale closed 1 hour ago. The board accepted my offer through a subsidiary. As majority owner, I'm implementing immediate operational changes. You're terminated effective immediately, along with everyone you reinstated. Dr. Patterson, Marcus Webb, Jennifer Park, Angela Morrison, all of them, gone. The ER will be closed for renovation, which means no emergency services for Port Sterling until I decide to reopen it. The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah looked through the window at the people who'd fought beside her, who'd risked everything to expose corruption, who were even now treating patients without knowing their jobs had just been eliminated. You're lying. The board wouldn't sell to you. The board consists of business people who understand that fighting federal investigations is expensive and time-consuming. I offered them a price that let them walk away clean, and they took it. Capitalism is wonderfully predictable that way. Martinez was frantically typing, pulling up records, her face going pale as she confirmed what Aldrich was saying. She showed Sarah her screen, incorporation documents filed that morning, transfer of assets completed through a web of shell companies that led back to Aldrich's network. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked quietly. Because I want you to understand what power actually means. You've been playing at resistance, thinking that exposure and publicity and congressional hearings matter. They don't. What matters is capital, ownership, the ability to acquire and dispose of assets at will. I own this hospital now. I own the board that fired you. I own the systems you think you reformed, and there's nothing you can do about it. Sarah's mind was racing through options, looking for angles, searching for any leverage that could counter this move. Aldrich had waited until Sarah was most vulnerable, exhausted from a mass casualty event, distracted by federal investigations, believing she'd actually won, and then struck with surgical precision at the one thing Sarah couldn't lose. What do you want? Sarah asked. I want you to stop. Withdraw from the congressional testimony, issue a statement saying you've reconsidered your position and realize the healthcare fraud allegations were overstated and disappear from public life permanently. Do that, and I'll reverse the sale, reinstate your staff, and leave Bridgewater alone. And if I refuse? Then I close the hospital permanently. 15,000 people in Port Sterling depend on that emergency department. Without it, the nearest trauma center is 47 miles away. People will die in transport who would have survived with immediate treatment. Their deaths will be on your conscience, Captain. All because you couldn't accept that some fights can't be won. The line went dead. Sarah sat frozen, feeling the weight of impossible choice crushing down on her. Surrender everything she'd fought for and save the hospital, or continue fighting and watch people die because of her principles. She's bluffing, Martinez said, but her voice lacked conviction. She can't just close a hospital without regulatory approval, community hearings. She can close it for renovation and drag the process out for years while people suffer. You know she can, and she will, because destroying Bridgewater hurts me more than it costs her. Sarah stood and walked out of the conference room, moving through the emergency department without seeing it, her mind spinning through tactical scenarios that all ended in stalemate. Aldrich had found the perfect pressure point. Sarah would sacrifice herself without hesitation, but she couldn't sacrifice the community that depended on this hospital. She was halfway to the parking lot when SSG Chen appeared, still in tactical gear from the warehouse raid, his expression troubled. Captain, we need to talk. Not now, Sergeant. Now, because I just got word that Catherine Aldrich has private security contractors moving into position around the hospital, military-grade equipment, coordinated positioning, professional setup. Whatever she's planning, it's happening soon. Sarah stopped walking. How do you know this? Because I'm still assigned to your protective detail, and we've been monitoring threats. Aldrich hired a firm called Sentinel Solutions, former special operations personnel who do security work for corporations. They're good at what they do, and what they're setting up looks like an armed occupation. Of a hospital. Of your hospital specifically. She's not just closing it through paperwork. She's going to physically seize it and dare anyone to stop her. Sarah felt something cold and clear settle into her mind. The combat calm that came from recognizing you were in contact and needed to respond immediately. Aldrich was escalating beyond business maneuvers into actual force, which meant she'd miscalculated. Violence drew attention, and attention was what Sarah needed. "Get Martinez," Sarah said. "Tell her we need every camera crew in Port Sterling here within the hour. And contact Senator Hammond. He needs to know what's happening." "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to give Catherine Aldrich exactly what she wants, a public confrontation where everyone can see what she really is." The next 60 minutes were a masterclass in rapid mobilization. SSG Chen contacted his command, getting authorization for active duty military presence to protect a federal witness. Martinez coordinated with FBI tactical teams and local law enforcement. Senator Hammond made calls to every news organization he had relationships with, promising them the story of the year if they got cameras to Bridgewater Regional immediately. Sarah gathered the ER staff in the main treatment area and explained the situation with brutal honesty. Catherine Aldrich has purchased this hospital through shell companies and is planning to close it. She has armed contractors on site who are going to physically seize the facility. We can evacuate now and let her win, or we can stay and make her remove us by force in front of every camera in the state. Dr. Patterson stepped forward. "I'm 73 years old, and I've worked in this ER for 42 years. If she wants my hospital, she'll have to carry me out." Angela raised her hand. "I'm staying." "Me too," Jennifer said. Marcus grinned. "Did you really think any of us would run, after everything we've been through?" Within minutes, every staff member had committed to staying. Patients who were stable enough to move were transferred to other facilities. Critical patients were kept in the ER with full medical teams attending them. Deliberate choices that meant Aldrich's contractors would have to forcibly remove medical personnel from actively dying patients if they wanted to clear the building. The news crews arrived first, local stations, then regional networks, then national outlets that had been covering the healthcare fraud story. They set up on the public sidewalks surrounding the hospital, their cameras trained on the entrances, reporters doing stand-ups explaining the developing situation. At 8 p.m., 3 black SUVs pulled up to Bridgewater Regional's main entrance. 24 men in tactical gear emerged, led by a woman in an expensive suit who walked with the absolute confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything in her life. Catherine Aldrich was 67 years old, silver-haired, and carrying herself with the kind of corporate authority that made boardrooms genuflect. She walked directly to the ER entrance, flanked by her contractors, and found Sarah waiting just inside the doors. "Captain Reynolds, I thought I was clear about my expectations." "You were. I'm choosing not to meet them." "Then you're forcing me to remove you and your staff from property I legally own. I'd rather not do this publicly, but you're leaving me no choice." "Actually, you have lots of choices. You could walk away. You could sell the hospital to people who'll actually run it as a medical facility instead of an investment vehicle. You could accept that your business model is finished and find something else to do with your billions." Aldrich's expression hardened. "I don't accept defeat from people like you. I've been building this network for 25 years, and I'm not letting one self-righteous combat medic destroy it because she doesn't understand economics. I understand that you're about to order armed contractors to forcibly remove medical staff from a functioning emergency department while every news camera in Oregon records it. I understand that no amount of lawyers can spin that into anything other than exactly what it is, a billionaire using violence to silence opposition. These people are trespassing on my property. These people are treating patients, and you're about to become the face of everything that's wrong with American healthcare." Aldrich gestured to her contractors. "Remove them. Start with the staff members who aren't actively treating patients, then move to federal agents." Martinez's voice cut through the confrontation as FBI teams emerged from positions throughout the hospital. "Catherine Aldrich, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, witness intimidation, and violations of the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. Everyone on the ground, hands visible." The contractors hesitated, their training warring with self-preservation instinct. Federal agents with drawn weapons had clear fields of fire and overwhelming tactical advantage. After 5 seconds of tense standoff, the contractors began lowering their weapons and complying with arrest procedures. Aldrich stood frozen, her face showing the first genuine emotion Sarah had seen, shocked disbelief that she could actually be arrested like a common criminal. "You can't do this," Aldrich said, her voice shaking. "I own this hospital. I have every right to secure my property." "You have the right to remain silent," Martinez said, moving forward with handcuffs. "And I strongly suggest you use it, because everything you say from this point forward will be used against you in federal court." The arrest played out in front of cameras that captured every moment. Aldrich being read her rights, her contractors being detained, the complete collapse of her attempt to seize the hospital through force. Within minutes, it was streaming live on every major network, the image of a billionaire in handcuffs next to the emergency department she'd tried to shut down. Sarah watched it happen with the exhausted satisfaction of someone who'd been in combat for too long and finally saw the enemy routed. Aldrich was still protesting as they put her in the federal vehicle, still insisting she'd done nothing wrong, still unable to comprehend that her power had limits. Senator Hammond appeared, having driven from Portland the moment he heard what was happening. He found Sarah in the ER, surrounded by staff who were processing what had just occurred. "Captain, the Senate Majority Leader just called me. We're fast-tracking the Reynolds Act, vote scheduled for tomorrow, and it's going to pass with overwhelming support." What just happened here, broadcast live to the entire country, made this impossible to oppose. What about the hospital sale? DOJ is moving to freeze the transaction as proceeds of criminal enterprise. The subsidiary that purchased Bridgewater is owned by Aldrich, and all her assets are subject to seizure now that she's under indictment. The hospital stays in community hands. Sarah felt something inside her chest finally release. Tension she'd been carrying for so long it had become part of her baseline state. Is it really over? The fighting is. The trials will take years, but the outcome isn't in doubt anymore. You've exposed a network that's been operating in shadows for decades. That doesn't happen without consequences for the people who built it. Over the next week, the full scope of those consequences became clear. Catherine Aldrich was denied bail after prosecutors demonstrated she'd attempted to flee the country using a private jet and forged documents. 17 more executives from her network were arrested as they tried to move money offshore or destroy evidence. The healthcare facilities she controlled were placed in receivership, their operations overseen by federal monitors until proper sales could be arranged. The congressional hearings concluded with sweeping recommendations for healthcare reform. The Reynolds Act passed both houses with bipartisan support, the first major healthcare legislation in a decade. It mandated patient care metrics over profit margins, created strict oversight for private equity acquisitions, established whistleblower protections, and allocated federal funding to support community hospitals that served vulnerable populations. Sarah testified one final time, this time before the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, laying out a vision for healthcare that prioritized healing over extraction. The testimony was carried live on C-SPAN and streamed millions of times online, becoming something of a viral moment when Sarah responded to a hostile question about government overreach. "You're asking if I think the federal government should interfere with free market healthcare," Sarah said. "I'm asking why we ever thought human suffering should be a free market in the first place. Healthcare isn't like selling widgets. When someone's dying, they can't shop around for better prices. They need help, immediately, from people who are trained and equipped to provide it. If your economic model requires sick people to be profitable revenue streams, your economic model is sociopathic." The clip played on news networks for days, sparking national conversation about the role of profit in medicine. Medical schools started using it in ethics classes. Healthcare workers referenced it when pushing back against cost-cutting mandates. Sarah returned to Port Sterling 3 weeks after Aldrich's arrest to find Bridgewater Regional transformed. The board, reconstituted with community members and healthcare professionals instead of business executives, had formally offered her the position of Chief Medical Officer with full authority over clinical operations. Dr. Patterson was named Director of Emergency Medicine, a role he accepted with tears in his eyes and a promise to train the next generation properly. The ER was fully staffed now, equipment upgraded, protocols revised to prioritize patient care over billing efficiency. Angela had been promoted to nursing supervisor. Marcus was teaching new residents how to practice medicine in under-resourced settings. Jennifer was leading a research project on healthcare access in rural communities. Sarah walked through the department on her first official day as CMO and saw what was possible when hospitals operated according to their stated mission instead of shareholder value. Patients were being treated with dignity and competence. Staff worked reasonable hours and received proper support. The building itself felt different, less like a business and more like what it was supposed to be, a place where broken things were healed. Her phone rang. General Caldwell. Captain, I wanted to be the first to tell you officially, the Army has completed its review of your service record. The discharge is being changed to honorable with full restoration of rank and benefits. You're also being awarded the Legion of Merit for exceptional service under combat conditions. The ceremony is scheduled for next month at the Pentagon if you'd like to attend. Sarah stood in the hospital hallway, listening to words she'd stopped believing she'd ever hear, and felt 8 years of shame and hiding finally dissolve. Thank you, sir. I'll be there. You should also know that your case is being taught at the Army War College now. Not just the medical decisions, but the ethical stance, refusing an unlawful order, accepting consequences, continuing to serve in civilian life. You've become an example of what military leadership should look like. After he disconnected, Sarah allowed herself a moment of privacy in an empty stairwell. She cried quietly, not from sadness, but from release. Releasing the guilt she'd carried about Kandahar, releasing the fear that she'd made the wrong choice, releasing the identity of someone who had to hide to survive. That evening, Marcus organized a celebration at Murphy's Bar, the same place where the staff used to gather after difficult shifts during Ashford's regime. The difference now was palpable. People were smiling, laughing, sharing stories about patients they'd helped instead of bureaucratic nightmares they'd endured. Dr. Patterson raised his glass. To Sarah Reynolds, who taught an old doctor that sometimes the right thing to do is speak up, even when speaking up costs everything. To Sarah, the room echoed. Sarah stood, feeling the weight of attention but comfortable with it now, instead of desperately wanting to escape. I didn't do this alone. Every person in this room made choices that mattered. You all refused to accept that healthcare should be about profit instead of people. That's what made the difference. But you started it, Jennifer said. You're the one who said no when everyone else was staying quiet. Because I'd stayed quiet before, and it ate me alive. I learned the hard way that hiding from fights doesn't make them go away. It just means the people who need you most lose by default. She looked around the bar at faces that had become family, at people who'd stood beside her through federal investigations and armed standoffs and congressional testimony. We've changed something real here, not just at Bridgewater but nationally. The Reynolds Act is going to protect patients and healthcare workers across the country. That's worth every risk we took. The celebration continued late into the night, stories and drinks flowing freely, but Sarah slipped out around midnight. She drove to the waterfront and stood looking at the harbor, at the city lights reflecting off dark water, and thought about the journey from combat surgeon to invisible nurse to reluctant activist. She'd been so convinced that being visible meant being vulnerable, that safety required anonymity, that the person she used to be had to stay buried to survive. But she'd been wrong. Visibility had made her powerful in ways hiding never could. Speaking truth had created change that silence never would. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Captain Reynolds, I'm a medical student at OHSU who watched your testimony. You inspired me to pursue emergency medicine instead of the lucrative specialty my parents wanted. Thank you for showing us that healthcare can be about more than money. Rachel Chen. Sarah smiled and typed back, Medicine needs people who care about patients more than profit. Welcome to emergency medicine. It's going to break your heart and remake it stronger, worth every minute. Over the following months, Sarah received hundreds of similar messages. Medical students changing specialties, healthcare workers speaking up about unsafe conditions, patients advocating for better care, communities organizing to protect their local hospitals. The ripple effects of one person refusing to stay silent had become a wave of systemic change. The trials began in federal court, and Sarah testified in each one with the same calm precision she'd brought to congressional hearings. Victor Ashford was convicted on all counts: healthcare fraud, witness intimidation, conspiracy. and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Catherine Aldrich faced trial 6 months later and received 23 years after being convicted of racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit assault. Sarah attended the sentencing hearing and watched as Aldrich was led away in handcuffs, still protesting her innocence, still unable to accept that accumulating billions through systemic harm had consequences. There was no satisfaction in it, just the quiet certainty that justice had been served. The day after Aldrich's sentencing, Sarah received a letter from the Army. Inside was a formal invitation to return to active duty with a promotion to major and assignment to Walter Reed Medical Center's trauma department. It was everything she'd lost 8 years ago, offered back without conditions or apology. She sat in her office at Bridgewater Regional, reading the letter 3 times, and then called General Caldwell. "Sir, I received the offer. And the Army needs surgeons like you. Walter Reed needs leadership that understands both medicine and ethics. I'm honored, truly, but I'm going to decline." Caldwell was quiet for a moment. "You're sure?" "I spent 8 years running from who I used to be, and it took me this long to realize I don't need to go back to it. I can be who I am now, someone who works in a community hospital, who fights for healthcare access, who trains the next generation to care about patients more than protocols. That's where I'm needed most. The Army's loss is Port Sterling's gain, but Captain, the door stays open. If you ever change your mind, we'll be here." "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." Sarah hung up and looked around her office. Walls covered with pictures of staff and patients, shelves holding medical journals and policy reports, a window overlooking the ER where people were being treated with dignity and competence. This was home now. This was purpose. This was exactly where she belonged. A year after Aldrich's conviction, Sarah was invited to speak at the American College of Emergency Physicians National Conference. The keynote address drew over 3,000 attendees, and Sarah stood at the podium looking out at a sea of healthcare workers who'd been fighting the same battles in their own institutions. "I'm not a hero," Sarah began. "I'm someone who got fired for speaking up, who nearly lost everything for refusing to stay quiet, who only survived because other people were brave enough to stand with me. But here's what I learned. Individual courage matters less than collective action. One person can expose corruption, but it takes thousands of people working together to create systemic change." She clicked to the next slide, showing statistics on healthcare outcomes since the Reynolds Act's implementation. In the past year, 47 hospitals that were scheduled to be closed by private equity firms remained open under new ownership structures that prioritize community benefit. Patient satisfaction scores nationwide increased by 12%. Nurse retention rates improved across the industry. Medical bankruptcies declined for the first time in 2 decades. The room was silent, everyone processing the scope of what had changed. "That didn't happen because I gave testimony. It happened because you, every person in this room, took those words and turned them into action in your own institutions. You spoke up about unsafe conditions. You advocated for patients. You refused to accept that profit mattered more than people. You're the ones who created change." After the speech, Sarah was surrounded by people wanting to share their stories. A nurse who'd reported Medicare fraud at her facility, a resident who'd organized against exploitative work hours, an attending who'd testified to their state legislature about healthcare access. Each one had made a choice to be visible, to speak truth, to fight back against systems that valued money over human dignity. Sarah listened to all of them, offered advice where she could, and recognized herself in their determination. This was the real legacy, not legislation or arrests or congressional hearings, but individual people deciding that silence was no longer acceptable. She flew back to Port Sterling the next day and went directly to Bridgewater Regional. The night shift was in full swing, the ER managing its usual organized chaos. Sarah changed into scrubs and joined the team treating a construction worker with a compound fracture, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of emergency medicine. This was what she'd fought for. Not glory or recognition or vindication, but this. The ability to practice medicine the way it was supposed to be practiced, in a facility that existed to heal people instead of extract profit from their suffering. Marcus found her around 2 a.m., during the quiet lull that sometimes happened between crises. "You know you don't have to work night shifts anymore. You're the CMO. You could have a normal schedule. And miss all this excitement? Never. You love this job. I love what this job represents. Every person we treat here, we're proving that healthcare can work differently. That's worth more than sleep. Jennifer appeared with coffee and a tablet showing metrics from the past quarter. Patient satisfaction at 93%. Average door-to-doctor time under 10 minutes. 0 Medicare fraud citations. We're officially the highest-rated emergency department in the state. Sarah looked at the numbers and felt pride that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with collective accomplishment. We did this together, every single person on staff. But you made it possible. You showed us it was worth fighting for. The rest of the shift passed quickly, and Sarah walked out of the hospital at dawn, exhausted but satisfied in a way that transcended simple tiredness. She drove home through Port Sterling's empty streets, past neighborhoods where people slept soundly, knowing they had access to healthcare that would be there when they needed it. Her apartment was quiet, filled with morning light, and Sarah stood at the window looking out at the city she'd chosen randomly 8 years ago as a place to disappear. It had become something else, a place where she'd found purpose, built community, learned that being seen was better than being safe. She thought about the soldier she'd been in Kandahar, making impossible choices under impossible conditions. She thought about the nurse she'd become, hiding from her past and convinced that invisibility was the same as peace. And she thought about who she was now, someone who stood in the light, who fought battles worth fighting, who refused to accept that power couldn't be challenged. All three were part of her story, pieces of an identity that had been broken and reassembled into something stronger than the original. Her phone buzzed one final time. A message from SSG Michael Chen. Captain, I'm being reassigned to Joint Base Lewis McChord next month. Before I go, I wanted to thank you again for saving my life in Kandahar, and for showing me that the fight doesn't end when we take off the uniform. You're still serving, just in a different way. Proud to have worked with you. SGT Chen. Sarah typed back, "The honor was mine, Sergeant. Keep fighting the good fight wherever they send you. And remember, sometimes the most important battles are the ones where you refuse orders that are wrong, even when it costs everything." She put down the phone and looked at herself in the mirror, seeing a woman who'd survived combat and court-martial and 8 years of hiding, who'd stood up to billionaires and federal investigations and armed contractors, who'd changed healthcare policy in the most powerful nation on earth. But more than that, she saw someone who'd learned the most important lesson combat had to teach. Courage wasn't the absence of fear or the refusal to hide. Courage was making yourself visible, knowing the risks, speaking truth, knowing the consequences, fighting battles worth fighting, because staying silent meant letting people suffer by default. Sarah Reynolds had been underestimated her entire life. By commanders who thought she'd accept unjust orders, by administrators who thought she'd accept unjust treatment, by billionaires who thought she could be intimidated into silence. They'd all been wrong. She was done being underestimated, done hiding, done accepting that power was something that happened to people instead of something people could wield for justice. She was exactly who she'd always been meant to be. A combat surgeon who refused to let people die for politics, a healthcare worker who refused to let profit matter more than patients, a human being who understood that sometimes the right thing to do is stand up and say no, even when everyone tells you to stay quiet, especially when everyone tells you to stay quiet. Sarah walked back to her window, watched the sun rise over Port Sterling, and smiled. The fight wasn't over. There would always be more corruption to expose, more systems to reform, more battles worth fighting. But for the first time in 8 years, she wasn't facing those battles alone or in hiding. She was facing them as herself, surrounded by people who believed what she believed, protected by laws she'd helped create, empowered by the knowledge that speaking truth could actually change the world. That was worth everything she'd risked, everything she'd lost, everything she'd fought for. Sarah Reynolds, captain, nurse, whistleblower, reformer, was home, and she was just getting started.